The happy life of a fun seeker in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 451, The Conspiracy Surrounding the Scepter. Sherlock neither completely believed nor completely disbelieved Hawkeye and Falcon's claims. God knows whether these two seemingly righteous individuals, but secretly full of scheming, were telling the truth. But it didn't matter. Sherlock was now involved, and with his involvement, he absolutely wouldn't let the events of Avengers 2 become the spark for civil war. The fact that the Avengers were searching for Loki's scepter, stolen by Hydra, became known to all the world's powers was quite dramatic. After Hydra became a universally reviled villain, nearly every power and nation was eyeing it. The reason was simple: the technology and resources Hydra possessed. After all, Hydra was born out of SHIELD, a global organization superior to the government. The technology of SHIELD, or Hydra itself, would make even some nations tremble with envy. The helicarrier alone was reason enough for all nations to target Hydra. You have to understand that even the US military doesn't have the helicarriers that SHIELD possesses. Not to mention the newly developed energy weapons and new materials derived from warship-like structures. Any of these technologies could create untold wealth. Furthermore, Hydra, due to its status, no longer has the backing of any other power, making it a natural target for competition. And those foolish US executives, while not saying it out loud, secretly treat SHIELD as their own. Now, the world is scrambling to claim their legacy. The US side is naturally not happy. But there's nothing they can do about it. After all, Hydra, a spin-off of SHIELD and a descendant of the Black Brazen, has built bases all over the world. For these greedy executives, if they can't truly control Hydra, SHIELD's legitimate successor, they at least want to reap the lion's share. With this in mind, these politicians began to muddy the waters, releasing a variety of rumors, both true and false, in an effort to delay other forces from acquiring Hydra's legacy. Of course, they weren't idle either. Leveraging their superior intelligence, these politicians, through special channels, informed the Avengers that Hydra's greatest legacy was Loki's scepter. They attempted to manipulate the Avengers into helping them retrieve it, promising them numerous benefits. However, the Avengers, unwilling to be manipulated, were unimpressed by the foolish and greedy politicians. After all, their initial purpose was simply to defeat Hydra. Only Captain America still harbored the desire to rescue his best friend. Seeing that the Avengers seemed unresponsive, the politicians, infuriated, devised a double-edged sword strategy, announcing that Hydra possessed Loki's scepter and that it held many undiscovered secrets. They also spread the word that Loki's scepter was already in the Avengers' sights. This forced the Avengers to focus their attention on Loki's scepter. After all, according to the information released by the politicians, the scepter indeed held immense, untapped power. This precipitated a global upheaval, with various factions and the Avengers vying for control of Loki's scepter, held by Hydra. Sherlock frowned as the two explained this. He had initially thought he'd underestimated the integrity of those politicians, having watched House of Cards, but he hadn't expected them to. Their limits were so low that even Sherlock couldn't believe it. Spying on Loki's scepter? How dare they? These politicians likely only saw Loki's scepter's ability to control minds, but they were unaware that its core was actually the Mind Stone, one of the Infinity Stones. Without the Infinity Stone's power, these politicians' pursuit of self-interest would be unconstrained enough. But with an Infinity Stone, especially one capable of controlling minds, what would become of it? It's no wonder the Avengers were forced to pursue Loki's scepter. Tony and Captain America, knowing the politicians' inner turmoil, immediately saw through their despicable intentions, forcing them to stir up trouble. This time, having received the latest news about Loki's scepter, they were about to set out to verify the information, but were unexpectedly stopped by Sherlock. What? The Avengers' source? Haha, believe it or not, the Avengers' source was actually Black Egg. Even though he handed SHIELD over to the good-natured Coulson, he actually used SHIELD's resources to build his own private army while still director. Considering the scene in the movie, Sherlock is even certain he's got a helicarrier capable of taking to the skies. Damn, who knows how much he's embezzled during his time at SHIELD. Sherlock was once again heartbroken by the price he'd charged when he first did business with Black Egg. If they're asking a kilogram of gold for a potion, the black salted egg guy can just add a few more coins and report it to the finance department. Damn it. By the time Sherlock had gotten a good grasp of the situation, the captain on the other side had finally accepted his transformation into a quality captain. Though his face was rosy, he left the restroom with a constipated expression. What? Why does the captain have that expression? If you let your mouth run wild and blew you a mouthful of unrefined, censored profanity in front of the mirror for half an hour, you'd have the same expression. Seriously, he'd just short of broadcasting the captain's length and diameter. The captain's reason for coming out was simple: he needed to brief Sherlock on the mission. After all, Sherlock had already spotted them and located them before the mission. It was a bit unreasonable to exclude Sherlock from the operation, but he couldn't let Charlotte in on the operation without knowing anything. Therefore, as the initiator of the operation, the captain had the responsibility and obligation to brief Sherlock on the mission. It was this mission briefing, under the influence of the classy captain, that was a bit unbearable to watch. Besides the unconscious Thor, everyone else was captivated by the captain's distinctive mission briefing stand-up comedy, happily sitting down with Sherlock to listen to the captain's talk show again. Watching the captain blushing and looking embarrassed while uncontrollably spouting some erotica was truly hilarious. Chapter 452: The starting point of the Sokovia incident. While everyone else was listening to the captain's mission briefing with amusement, Sherlock was in a cold sweat. The reason was simple: the mission's location. Sokovia. This was a small country that hadn't existed in his previous life, a landlocked nation in Eastern Europe, perennially mired in war and civil unrest. And the reason Sherlock was so focused was simple: this was where the Avengers 2 took place. Even the subsequent Avengers Civil War was caused by this obscure country, Sokovia. It could be said that this was the starting point for the Avengers division in decline. And Sherlock had almost missed such a crucial plot. Sherlock himself was in a cold sweat. If he had truly missed this, all the efforts Sherlock had made to prevent the split would have been in vain. Thanks to Wang for that casual mention. At that moment, Sherlock wondered if he had gone too far by ripping Wang off for a meal before leaving. Watching Sherlock wandering off into space, the captain knew he'd probably barely grasped the briefing, but he didn't care. After briefly explaining a few important points, he tried to contact Tony and ask him to return quickly. But just as he picked up the phone, Sherlock stopped him. After Sherlock explained the situation to everyone present, everyone fell silent. Envy crossed a men's faces, while Black Widow's face flushed slightly, wondering what she was thinking. A full 2.5 hours later, Tony finally returned, refreshed, in his suit. As soon as he stepped out of the suit, Tony noticed something was different. Why were the people looking at him so strangely? The captain silently stepped forward, patted Tony, who stood there in bewilderment, and walked towards the exit without saying anything. Banner and Falcon, in their suits, Black Widow, who was about to make a joke but was silenced by her handcuffs, looked at Tony meaningfully before leaving behind the captain. Sherlock, holding up the terrified Thor, who had just regained consciousness, gave Tony a look that said, "May the best be for you," and then followed the others out. Only Hawkeye, who was already married, was left. With a lewd smile on his face, he patted Tony on the shoulder, leaning in close to Tony's face and whispered, "So, Tony, did Pepper finally confess?" This question made Tony blush, and almost instantly, he realized who had leaked his entry information. Sherlock. "You better give me a perfect explanation." Hearing Tony's exasperated roar behind him, everyone who had already left laughed in unison. Thanks to Sherlock's magic, the Avengers were able to enjoy a 5-minute global teleportation. Of course, to avoid any trouble, Sherlock transformed before opening the portal, amidst Banner's exclamations. Seeing Sherlock transformed into a magically robed cell man, Dr. Banner's perspective was profoundly shaken. He exclaimed that it was impossible, even considering using existing physics to prove Sherlock's magic. However, after experiencing Sherlock's teleportation magic firsthand, Dr. Banner gave up completely and began to marvel at the magic. After all, Sherlock had already opened the portal right at the enemy's lair, so there was no time for Dr. Banner to marvel at it. He simply transformed into the Hulk and started smashing things up. Of course, Sherlock wasn't idle either. He used transfiguration to conjure up the same sideboard-sized axe that Hulk had been so fond of when he last frightened Loki. Appreciating the chance to once again hold his beloved axe, Hulk gave Sherlock a thumbs up with his fist, which was almost as big as Sherlock's head, accompanied by his signature wicked grin. Well, Sherlock couldn't help but think of the Black Widow and Hulk memes again. But it was clear the Hulk hadn't given it much thought. With a mighty leap, he charged directly into the crowd. Seeing the Hulk leap forward and unleash his full power, the others hurried to follow, only Sherlock followed leisurely, seemingly unhurried. Indeed, Sherlock wasn't in a rush. For Sherlock, this battle wasn't enough to threaten the Avengers, the more pressing matters lay ahead. Sherlock's reason for following suit was simple: he wanted to test the power of his newly acquired world scepter, imbued with a reality stone, or as he preferred to call it, the sonic screwdriver. And you know what? When Sherlock actually charged into the crowd, sonic screwdriver in one hand and wand in the other, he finally understood the joy of a Gry finder and why Gandalf had chosen illumination in his magic skill set. Close combat is truly thrilling. Every wizard has a melee spirit, it's no mere rhetoric. And with the world scepter's power, Sherlock truly experienced unparalleled joy. Thanks to the powerful blessing of the reality stone, Sherlock can distort and negate enemy attacks at will. If he so chooses, he can even imitate the attacks of any world's protagonist through the resonance of magic and the reality stone. Sherlock is having a blast, saying things like "Do you want to dance too?" and "The world is full of troubles." He's having a blast. The captain is also having just as much fun as Sherlock. While the captain seems fine, fighting and sparring are normal, his mouth is almost identical to Sherlock's. Well done, Thor. Leave no one alive. Wow. Their brains are all splattered. Who else? Oh. An old man and a child. Let me kill them first. Ha ha ha, that's fine. Oh, there's even a tattoo of Tony's face on his chest. Chop off his limbs, gut him, and use him as a fucking bastard for the Hulk. Well, it's because the Hulk doesn't have the team's language. Otherwise, with Captain's now honey-coated mouth, it's hard to say who will become the Hulk's fucking bastard. Listening to the team chat, one person exuding a Chunibayao vibe, referring to Sherlock, and the other a telegraph machine, referring to Captain. Tony couldn't stand it anymore and yelled at them both into the comms. Can you be quiet? Oh my god. Captain, be polite. But Captain was clearly too busy fighting to control his words, so his mouth automatically retaliated. Fuck you, Tony. I've never seen anyone with a foul mouth and you, PFFT. Ha 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 ha. 5. Chapter 453. Sherlock is slacking off. Putting aside the bizarre call logs, Sherlock was having a blast. Using the reality warping power of the reality stone within the world scepter, Sherlock completely ignited his inner Chunibayao. Towards the end, Sherlock even put away his want to focus on cosplay. Sherlock incorporated every classic skill from the three most popular manga, Naruto, Ultraman, and Death. While there were some subtle differences, Sherlock's renditions were incredibly successful, reminiscent of the Zanpakuto from Bleach or Zoro's swordsmanship from One Piece. Whether it was Zoro's sword energy or the myriad Zanpakuto abilities from Bleach, Sherlock perfectly recreated them with the world scepter. However, the ninjutsu from Naruto and the devil fruit abilities from One Piece were a bit lacking. After all, the perfectionist Sherlock couldn't accept the idea of various jutsu being ejected from his scepter instead of being blown from his mouth. How the hell was that even remotely different from magic? What really shattered Sherlock's defenses was his attempt to use apparition to imitate the impressive move our eternal sister used to bludgeon a Bido, something called Flying Thunder God Stage 2. Well, the first half was mostly flawless. Apparition's power even surpassed Eternal Sister's Flying Thunder God, allowing him to instantly teleport behind his opponent without even needing a kunai to aim. But when Sherlock actually used the World Scepter to simulate a Rasengan, his defenses were broken. The Rasengan didn't appear in his hand, but on the World Scepter itself. While Sherlock admitted the World Scepter was quite useful, using its magic to activate the reality stone within it, allowing it to fully unleash its power while also shielding it from damaging the user, Sherlock absolutely refused to accept the Rasengan appearing on the World Scepter instead of in his own hand. The Rasengan's round shape, combined with the World Scepter's length, which was roughly the same as a magic wand, made it look like, well, a half-developed microphone. Or maybe it's like the 1915 percussion grenade, the melee weapon used by the idiots in Battlefield 5. In short, it's incredibly strange. Edame's Flying Thunder God instantly appears behind Abido and slams a microphone into his back? What a change of pace. But that's not the weirdest part. The weirdest part is when Sherlock tries to simulate devil fruit abilities. That's truly unique. Take our protagonist, Luffy's Nikano, Michigan, for example. Sherlock imagined the reality stone warping itself, transforming his arms into rubber like Luffy's, allowing him to use Luffy's classic mushroom machine gun abilities. But what actually happened? Sherlock used his magic to transmit his thoughts to the reality stone, and the stone successfully activated, warping reality and sprouting 2 arms from the world scepter. These 2 arms then unleash Luffy's signature attack. Well, if you say the parahuman or animal types can't be simulated, that's fine. Sherlock decisively switched to the Pika Pika no Mi, hoping to experience Kizaru's lightspeed kick. After all, who can resist a show-off moment of horrible and supernova? But look at how the reality stone made Sherlock pull it off. Horrible wasn't hard enough, Sherlock could say that himself, but the lightspeed kick was truly unbearable. The reality stone simulated the lightspeed kick by causing Kizaru's thigh to sprout from the tip of the world scepter. Did the lightspeed kick work? It did. But it clearly wasn't as satisfying as kicking it yourself. A frown crossed Sherlock's forehead, and he held Kizaru's leg in his hand. He resolved to go home tonight and thoroughly study the World Scepter user manual that King had given him. The scene before him was truly unbelievable. After all, strength is only temporary, but handsomeness is a lifelong thing. Even though Uncle Ape's lightspeed kick was incredibly effective and incredibly powerful, Sherlock simply couldn't handle the idiotic pose of someone holding a thigh in front of him. What? Why didn't Sherlock go find Wanda and Quicksilver? Honestly, Sherlock didn't want to. While both had great potential, their warped values were simply unacceptable. After all, even if a Stark Industries bomb had torn you apart from your loved ones, why wouldn't you seek revenge on the person who dropped the bomb, instead of resenting Tony, the bomb maker? It's like someone buying a kitchen knife from the village blacksmith and killing your loved one, and instead of seeking revenge, you resent the blacksmith for selling the knife to them? Sherlock simply couldn't understand their train of thought. After all, even if there hadn't been a Stark bomb, there were still 5 Tucker and 6 Tucker. The arms trade was an ancient business, and even if Tony quit, who else would take it up? If it were Sherlock, the first person he'd resent would be the mastermind behind the bomb, and secondly, the middleman who sold it. After all, as a manufacturer, Tony had no say in who he sold to. As a legitimate arms dealer, Tony's job was limited to producing weapons and setting their own pricing. After all, Tony wasn't a ruthless arms dealer like Obadiah. Wait. As Sherlock thought about this, he realized something was a little off-putting. Could it be that Obadiah was selling all that Sokovia's arms? Sherlock frantically counted the numbers, and the timing was right. So, Tony really had to take the blame. After all, he was Obadiah's nephew, and everyone on Earth knew about it. But few people knew about Obadiah's rampant theft and sales of arms. Sherlock silently crossed himself over to Tony, who had already offended the most hardcore woman in the Marvel Universe. Hopefully, Tony would be alright this time. Just when Sherlock had decided not to get involved in Wanda and Quicksilver's troubles, he was dealt a heavy blow the next second. A familiar magical power erupted from the nearby castle. It was the exact same power Sherlock had fused with a reality stone before heading to Las Vegas. Even Sherlock himself was shocked. Chapter 454 Sherlock and Wanda. Following the direction of the magical outburst, Sherlock apparated in just a few moments to discover its source, the teleporting Scarlet Wanda. This was Sherlock's first time seeing the girl who had starred in countless fanfictions. Yes, a girl. Wanda now looked much like Sherlock, her face brimming with collagen. Aside from her eyes, which lacked the clear, innocent naivete of a university student, she had the look of a rebellious college student. But there was one thing, Wanda's figure was truly amazing. Of course, Sherlock didn't dwell on Wanda's appearance. Instead, he stood high above, carefully observing her magical abilities and how she used them. The use of magic aside, Wanda currently had no way to unleash her own magical powers. The way she dealt with Captain America and Tony, to Sherlock, wasn't so much magic as the application of her own magical properties. It was this very magic that left Sherlock scratching his head. The more Sherlock observed, the more it resembled the magic he'd once combined with a reality stone. In other words, Wanda could very well use her own magic. But only if she didn't bother to manage her own chaotic magical system. Otherwise, there's a high chance it would be like Sherlock using the magic of camouflage. It might work, but the effects are uncertain. Observing everything from above, Sherlock's mind raced, his thoughts subconsciously replaying what the Ancient One had said about his apprentice. Could Wanda be the apprentice who could inherit my magic? The thought, once it emerged, lingered in his mind like a wild dog, unable to be dispelled. It seemed to be the attraction of a shared magical heritage, or perhaps the attraction of being a fellow magician. Having just dealt with Captain America, Wanda immediately noticed Sherlock standing tall. Though Sherlock's appearance had changed, his signature attire immediately revealed his identity, a wizard. Of all the Avengers, the wizards who wielded mysterious and powerful magic were perhaps the ones Wanda was most drawn to. As young as a calf, fearless as a tiger, Wanda's first thought upon seeing Sherlock in his wizard's vest wasn't to flee, but to challenge the renowned sorcerer for a showdown. So, after dispatching the captain, Wanda, without hesitation, flashed her hands with a red glow of her own magic, and with the help of her magical power, she instantly floated before Sherlock. Sherlock didn't stop Wanda, but stared at her with intense interest, as if eager to see what she was up to. But Sherlock never expected Wanda to show no respect for martial virtue. Without a word, she launched into a showdown with her self-taught chaos magic. While Wanda's magic was formidable, and the chaos-infused magic was powerful, her immature use still made Sherlock's lips twitch. With a simple wave of her wand, without even casting a spell, she simply released her own magical energy, effectively interrupting Wanda's so-called magic. This result stunned Wanda, who had always considered herself powerful under Hydra's guidance. She had never imagined that her proud abilities would be so vulnerable before this true wizard. Seeing Wanda frozen in shock and fear, unsure of what to do, Sherlock, who had initially been reluctant to care about the siblings, sighed helplessly. A hoarse voice, transformed by magic, emanated through the thick black mist above his head. Put aside your crude and immature use of magic. This is real magic. To help Wanda better appreciate the true power of so-called magic, Sherlock, for the first time since entering Dumbledore's realm, cast his full power on the simplest spell. A levitation charm. As Sherlock unleashed his spell, Wanda felt a surge of overwhelming magical energy. Her vaunted magic seemed like a drop of water before this vast, ocean-like power. To Wanda's relief, Sherlock's magical surge wasn't directed at her, but rather an area of effect spell. With Sherlock's full force, the levitation spell enveloped nearly the entire castle. Everything within seemed to have suddenly lost its gravity. All objects not rigidly connected were forcibly lifted aloft by Sherlock's magic, even Wanda, who had no idea what was happening. Wanda looked at Sherlock with a mixture of fear and longing, like a cat or dog suddenly transported into space. She was terrified by Sherlock's magical prowess, which almost crushed her own. She longed for Sherlock's vast magical prowess, a level of magic she had never seen before. If only I could reach that level, wouldn't my hometown be engulfed in war? As soon as these thoughts entered Wanda's mind, they spread uncontrollably, taking over her mind like a virus. Sherlock's magic faded as quickly as it came, and he quickly ended it. After Sherlock's fall, the Avengers, who had been trapped in Wanda's illusions, quickly regained consciousness. After glancing at Sherlock standing on the upper floor, they quickly rejoined the battle. Seeing Wanda's increasingly fanatical gaze, Sherlock's mouth twitched again. His impulsive attempt at mentoring seemed to have landed him in serious trouble. After a moment's reflection, Sherlock flicked his wand and unleashed a petrifying spell on Wanda, leaving her with no control over her body except her thoughts. Just as Sherlock was about to say something, a surge of magical power, nearly as powerful as Sherlock's, erupted from behind him. Wanda, frozen in place, vanished in the blink of an eye. Quicksilver? Is it the same case of magic specialization as Seamus, the explosive genius in HP? It seems that Quicksilver's magic works on himself, which can greatly enhance his speed and metabolism. Looking at the empty corridor in front of him, Sherlock calmly analyzed Quicksilver's situation and said to himself. But soon, Sherlock gave up thinking about it. After all, compared to Quicksilver and Wanda, Sherlock was more interested in how Hydra gave the two of them magic through the Mind Stone. Okay, change the target, end the slacking off. I want to obtain all the experimental records and data of the twins. Baron Craster, pray that I can get this information from your server or computer, instead of from your head. Chapter 455, Failure of the Creation of Hogwarts. Facts once again proved Murphy's Law's terrifying accuracy. When Sherlock found Tony, he learned that Hydra's computers no longer contained any data on human experiments. What remained were only research materials on robotic and alien weaponry. Looking at this remaining data, it was clear that the brilliant Baron Strucker intended to use this information, along with his knowledge of the applications of alien weaponry and materials, to secure a good future for himself. After all, no matter how powerful the Avengers were, they couldn't replace the courts in trying these Hydra agents, right? Furthermore, SHIELD, the agency that originally handled these cases, had completely vanished. So, the standard procedure now was to bring the top brass back to the Eagle Sauce, and leave the rest to the local government. Well, that was standard procedure for the Eagle Sauce's top brass. What? SHIELD had just been destroyed by the Hydra incident, and now those foolish Eagle Sauce brass were planning to absorb Baron Strucker, a Hydra agent? Haha, you're really underestimating those foolish and greedy politicians in the United States. You have to understand that the entire United States isn't really a country, but rather a giant business conglomerate, essentially a collection of greedy businessmen. Businessmen are subject to the laws of business. When profits reach a certain level, they won't hesitate to declare war on hell, not to mention violating ethics and laws. Therefore, recruiting a few useful, reformed, villain scientists is a piece of cake for these greedy saints. Furthermore, Baron Strucker's own scientific expertise is truly impressive. Besides Wanda and Quicksilver, the two beneficiaries of his human experiments, the weapons and equipment being developed through Chitauri technology are no slouch. There's even an exoskeleton suit, invented by some unknown means. While not as convenient and flexible as Tony's Iron Man suit, it can still levitate for short periods of time and greatly enhances a soldier's combat capabilities. While it might not be much of a threat to the Avengers charging through the battlefield, if this thing were deployed in the military, the combat effectiveness of those ground-based savages would surely increase several times over. Seeing that he couldn't find the information he sought from Tony, Sherlock had no choice but to go ahead and retrieve it from poor Baron Strucker's head. Poor Baron Strucker, you'd rather live your life than try to experience the sensation of having your head stuck in a microwave. Sherlock had no objection to this, however. After all, Baron Strucker's use of human subjects for experiments had already crossed Sherlock's line. Even if Baron Strucker had already found a way out for him, Sherlock had no intention of letting him follow his own path. After announcing his need to find Baron Strucker over the comms, Sherlock calmly toured the Hydra weapons manufacturing facility. It was truly a wealth of cutting-edge technology. Sherlock even spotted some war robots that resembled Tony's battlefield support robots. Speaking of which, Tony's idea for battlefield support robots came from the Iron Engineering team that he had a sudden idea for during the training ground. After all, this thing is really useful. After a while, Sherlock heard a call from Captain Suzy through his earphones, telling Sherlock that he had seen Baron Strucker and was currently tracking him. After hearing the call, Sherlock stopped slacking off and put away his thoughts that had already spread dysentery. After a simple sense of the captain's location, he began to rush in the captain's direction. Although Sherlock hurried as fast as he could, he was still a step behind. By the time Sherlock could see the two of them, Baron Strucker didn't even look like he was being captured. He even challenged the captain. He used the classic Hydra trick of lurking in shield. Sherlock's eyebrows jumped when he saw it, and he could feel Baron Strucker's aura of seeking death from a distance. Sure enough, after Baron Strucker came up and attacked him face to face, the captain, who had become a disciplined captain, didn't tolerate this guy at all. He grabbed the edge of the shield with both hands and slammed it into Baron Strucker's face. No. Spare his life. Although Sherlock tried his best to stop him, Baron Strucker, who had received the captain's angry blow, still went limp like a noodle. Well, it can be said that he died very ugly. That face looked as if it had been ironed by an electric iron, so smooth. God knows how Sherlock felt, watching a European and American's face turned into a frying pan under the captain's disciplined attack. However, the outrageous thing was that even after beating Baron Strucker like this, there was no blood on the captain's shield except Baron Strucker's saliva and snot. Fuck. You at %. While Sherlock was arguing with Captain Suzy, he quickly began to use magic to extract Baron Strucker's memories. Determined to extract as much as he could, Sherlock began to use his magic with all his might. Perhaps because Baron Strucker had been slapped by the captain, breathing more than breathing in, even with Sherlock's full power, the memories he could extract were still fragments. Even so, it was enough to satisfy Sherlock's curiosity. The good news was that Sherlock had indeed mastered the technique to use the Mind Stone to create someone who could learn his magic. The bad news was that this method was far too cruel. According to Baron Strucker's memories, if Sherlock wanted to create another Wanda, he would first have to find 1,000 children. After a series of experimental modifications, only about 100 would survive. The next step is to use the Mind Stone for catalysis. At this stage, the elimination rate is still terrifyingly high. In this step, only 10 out of 100 people can gain abilities, and the process is extremely painful. Under the influence of the Mind Stone, it is easy to become mentally disturbed. And even if all 10 people gain abilities, 9 of these 10 people have superpowers that are specialized in magic like Quicksilver. It is already a blessing to be able to cast magic like Wanda. As for those players who are specialized in magic, well, it's not that they can't learn magic, but the process must be extremely painful. Just look at Seamus, the blasting genius in HP. According to Sherlock's guess, Seamus is actually a person who has been slightly specialized in magic and turned into a blaster. Chapter 456, Tony, the Big Enemy. After understanding the details, Sherlock abandoned his idea of creating a real-life Hogwarts within Marvel. He casually cast a ball of fire, reducing the evildoer Baron Strucker to dust. Only then did he stand up and pat the captain on the shoulder. Be more patient next time. You're too quick-tracked. This guy's crimes are enough to get him executed from the beginning of the year to the end. A death like this would be too easy for him. While Sherlock's words were true, Steve, now a disciplined captain, couldn't control his tongue. As soon as Sherlock finished speaking, his mouth, like honey, began to fire off telegrams. Hey, you little brat, you still want to control me? The situation was truly infuriating. The captain's honeyed mouth kept sending telegrams, but the look he gave Sherlock was filled with deep apology. Sherlock almost thought the captain, like Laura, was suffering from schizophrenia. Despite being furious at the captain's telegram, Sherlock, knowing the true nature of his potion, ultimately waved his hand at the captain, signaling him to move away. Hey, you idiot, you're still impatient. Sherlock ultimately decided to let the captain go, but it was clear the captain's mouth wasn't about to let Sherlock off. After hearing his own words, the captain's pace quickened considerably. Sherlock, still standing there, listened to the captain spitting nonsense and his somewhat embarrassed escape, his blood pressure still as high as ever. Especially looking at the captain's perky American ass, Sherlock truly wished the captain could experience the enhanced 1,000 years of death that Naruto had used on Gaara during the Chunin exams, laced with detonating tags. So that the captain's honeyed mouth would learn that a person's mouth should be at least a little cleaner than pies. With Baron Strucker's return to dust, the battle against Hydra came to a close, and Loki's scepter, the much-debated scepter, finally fell into the hands of the Avengers. On the return flight, everyone present, save Hawkeye, who was missing a kidney and refused to use Sherlock's potion, unanimously decided to have Thor dispose of the scepter upon return. After all, it had been Loki's possession, and tossing it to Asgard would be a return to its rightful owner. Sherlock had no objection. Putting aside his own presence, the possibility of the future Vision and Ultron being born, the Mind Stone within the scepter alone posed a significant challenge. With a Reality Stone in his possession, Sherlock began to revere the Infinity Stones. The Reality Stone was already a formidable challenge, but adding the Mind Stone, capable of invisibly influencing the human mind, would open up a world of endless fun for Earth. The plane was still incredibly fast. After all, it was built by Tony based on the technology from his spaceship, and it was countless times faster than a normal plane. Soon, everyone was back on the tarmac of Stark Tower, where they had left. But what Sherlock hadn't expected was that after the plane landed, the previously quiet top floor of Stark Tower suddenly became bustling with activity. A crowd of people rushed out from the nearby entrance, some pushing Hawkeye for treatment, others responsible for weapon maintenance, others for data transmission, and others in charge of personnel detention. The entire top floor of Stark Tower was instantly abuzz with activity, and looking at this group of incredibly professional people, Sherlock felt strangely familiar. That is, until Sherlock spotted someone familiar, Black Egg's deputy, Maria Hill. If Maria Hill had already appeared, how could Black Egg be far behind? Sherlock knew, even with his heels, that Black Egg was definitely inside Stark Tower right now. Suddenly, Sherlock looked at his good Uncle Tony with a strange look in his eyes. How should I put it? It was as if two large, gleaming golden characters had suddenly appeared on Tony's forehead. Unjust. At the same time, Sherlock felt sorry for that good old man, Coulson. It looked like Coulson had simply been pushed out by the wicked Black Egg to take the blame. All that talk of inheriting SHIELD was pure scapegoating. Just look at the situation now. Coulson, the so-called SHIELD official, with a bunch of rookies, is now holed up in Europe, struggling to become a government supplier. He's toiling away every day while also dealing with Hydra's targeting. Even his best equipment is the vertical takeoff aircraft Black Egg once provided Coulson with. And look at Black Egg. With Tony, a wealthy man, backing him, he has no financial worries. He's surrounded by top-tier elites, and possesses countless cutting-edge technologies. In just a short while, Sherlock had already seen a parade of soldiers wearing exoskeletons similar to Hydra's, but clearly modified by Tony in his own unique style. And thinking back to the movie, Black Egg managed to build a functioning helicarrier and transport victims from Sokovia. For a moment, Sherlock couldn't even decide who the legitimate successor to SHIELD was. Black Egg had been quite aggressive in his bullying of the honest folks. Sherlock was already anticipating the expression on Coulson's face, the Marvel Cinematic Universe's famously nice-natured newbie village leader's face, when he told him all of Black Egg's audacious actions. But Sherlock was even more surprised when Agent Hill approached with a tablet, wanting to share Wanda and Quicksilver's information with Captain America. Tony's response: "I'm not the boss. I'm just the provider of funding and technology. Whoever likes to send telegrams is the boss." Sherlock was completely stunned. "Good man, you've contributed money, effort, technology, and venues, and you still say you're not the boss? You don't even do charity work like this, do you? You have so much money you just don't know where to spend it?" Sherlock was shocked, but he didn't understand it at all. Suddenly, Sherlock felt like the words on Tony's forehead had suddenly multiplied, emitting bursts of dazzling light. What a weirdo. Sherlock decided it was time to have a serious talk with Tony about the corruption at Black Sauce Egg. If Tony dared to refuse him, then he would have to have a serious talk with his Aunt Pepper. After all, there had to be someone who could handle this lawless rich man. Chapter 457, Single Dog Sherlock's Love Class, Part 1. Sherlock's risk-off drug rescue plan for Tony hadn't even begun when it was forced to reconsider. The reason was simple: Sherlock was approached by the idiot Thor. Thor had actually wanted to talk to Sherlock since he regained consciousness after arriving on the battlefield. After all, in the illusion Sherlock had given him, Thor had actually experienced his brother dying in his arms and his mother being murdered before his eyes. Indeed, Sherlock had given Thor a first-person perspective on the events of Thor 2. Faced with such a devastating shock, Thor had honestly wanted to talk to Sherlock. However, dealing with Hydra was imminent, so Thor had to temporarily suppress his doubts and vent his anger on the poor Hydra. It wasn't until they returned on the plane, after hurriedly convincing him about the handling of Loki's scepter, that Thor finally found the opportunity to invite Sherlock to a private conversation. Sherlock had been mentally prepared for Thor's invitation and accepted without hesitation. Seeing Sherlock's agreement, Thor led the way, leading Sherlock to a relatively private area. That's right, the bedroom Tony had arranged for him. Sherlock's mouth twitched sharply at the sight of the tangled, balled-up quilt, and the bedroom's cleanliness. It was practically untidy, almost to the point of leaving no space for footstools. He wasn't in the habit of making his own quilt, but to be honest, Sherlock couldn't stand such a slovenly bedroom. Thor, unfazed, plopped down on his bed and waved, signaling Sherlock to come over. Sherlock couldn't help but twitch his lips at this clearly misleading scene, and he complained in a sullen tone. "I'm sorry, Thor. I think you should know I don't like men. But I won't discriminate against people like you. If you've only come to me to tell me you've changed your sexual orientation, then I can only say, I wish you the best." Sherlock's merciless taunting seemed to infuriate Thor, who stood up and roared at him. "Bullshit. Heaven and earth bear witness to my love for Jane. I will never like men, not in this lifetime." Seeing Sherlock's clearly disbelieving gaze, Thor honestly felt the urge to smash Sherlock's hateful face with his Meowth hammer. After taking a deep breath, Thor barely suppressed the urge, his expression becoming serious as he addressed Sherlock. "Let's get down to business, Sherlock. What were those images you showed me?" "I saw Loki's death, and my mother's death." Sherlock was clearly unsurprised by Thor's question and answered directly and frankly. "Nothing, I just hope you can grow up a little. Your brother and mother are doing well now. As you know, Your brother is an apprentice king in Asgard, and your mother lives a carefree life in my family's training grounds. As for what you saw, well, I'm sure you should have seen it long ago. I wasn't in those images, so you can just treat it as something that would happen in a parallel world without me. Sherlock thought this explanation would be enough to fool Thor, but to his surprise, Thor's face turned to disdain after hearing his explanation. Don't fool me, Sherlock. Jane taught me physics. Parallel worlds are just theoretical conjectures. There's currently no evidence to prove they actually exist. Thor's face lit up with a smug look, leaving Sherlock stunned. Holy crap. How hasty. Thor, a barbarian, actually stopped swinging his hammer and started reading. It has to be said that love is indeed a magical thing. Jane Deeren was able to make a guy like Thor, whose brains were all muscles, put down his beloved hammer and pick up a boring physics book. This action alone was enough for Jane to go to the Vatican to apply for a cardinal or something. If this happened in the Middle Ages, maybe the entire church would belong to Jane. This ability to spread the word was simply unparalleled. God knows how difficult it is to let a berserker study. Anyway, Sherlock couldn't imagine how Jane did it. But looking at Thor, who was still smug, Sherlock thought about the Ford Super Supreme VIP membership card that was still in his wallet, as well as the Super Supreme VIP membership cards of a dozen auto repair shops and modification shops across the country. Sherlock felt it for the future life of his beloved car, and to no longer be fooled by Ford 4S stores, he had to continue to deceive Thor. After all, Thor and Jane finally got married. If they broke up now and Thor found someone else, Sherlock would have to go through the same thing again, being summoned to Asgard by the Rainbow Bridge just to help this guy deliver a love letter. Sherlock refused. Thinking of this, Sherlock refuted without even thinking. Science has a hard time observing the existence of parallel worlds, but that doesn't mean magic can't. You, a berserker, don't understand the beauty of magic. While we can't break the barrier between parallel worlds and our own, we can still observe them with simple observation. These parallel worlds are so diverse, they look all sorts of different. You might not believe it, but in some parallel worlds, your brother Loki is no longer a brother, but a sister. Yes, you heard that right, Loki is a woman. In the most outrageous parallel world I've ever seen, Loki isn't even a human, but a crocodile. And I'm sharing your experiences with you not to get you to come and discuss the existence of parallel worlds, but to make you mature. God knows why, as a prince of Asgard, you can't even coax your girlfriend. Jane is already your girlfriend, and she quarreled with you. Why are you so angry with her? You just go up and hug her and kiss her until she loses her temper. Isn't that enough? You're such a loser. Do I need to teach you how to be in a relationship? That's right. Sherlock grew increasingly excited as he spoke, even reciting anecdotes about domineering CEO literature he'd read online in his past life. As for Thor, well, Thor no longer cared about the existence of parallel worlds. During Sherlock's first half of his speech, Thor had a quiet, unwavering demeanor. But when Sherlock steered the conversation towards domineering CEO literature, Thor's eyes lit up, like a golden retriever that had found a bone. Honestly, that was only because Thor didn't have a tail, otherwise it would have been swaying like a helicopter propeller. Chapter 458, Single Dog Sherlock's Love Class, Part 2. It was a case of one man speaking his mind, the other believing it. A 1,500-year-old man in his first relationship was being lectured on the art of love by a single man, barely a fraction of his own age. The two of them were acting strangely, especially when Sherlock explained the first step in his domineering literature. Thor, as if suddenly enlightened, looked at Sherlock with excitement and asked bluntly, "I've tried what you said, but Jane always pushes me away." Thor's expression was still a little downcast at this point, and Sherlock was almost furious. "You've gone through the pain of losing your brother, you've gone through the pain of losing your mother, and yet you're only interested in my domineering literature?" At that moment, Sherlock felt the full force of his love-brainedness. He rolled his eyes at Thor and pointed at his arms, which looked thick enough to run a horse. "Did you build all that muscle for nothing? Jane pushed you away, and you let her push you away? Jane's so skinny, how could she possibly push someone as big and strong as you? Why do you care about Jane's reaction? You shouldn't care about how she reacts. You just forcefully hugged her and kissed her, moving towards the bedroom. A couple who argues never stay overnight, don't they? They always quarrel at the head of the bed and make up at the foot of the bed, right? Do I need to teach you this? You useless piece of shit." As Sherlock spoke, Thor's eyes visibly brightened. But when Sherlock finished, Thor's gaze, which had been almost like a flashlight, suddenly dimmed. Thor sat on the bed, holding his head in his hands, a look of pain on his face, whispering softly, "It's too late to say anything now. I don't even know how I should face Jane." Looking at Thor's expression, Sherlock thought for a long time before sighing helplessly. He walked over, patted Thor on the shoulder, and spoke. "Thor, you must understand that your father, Odin, has a reason for opposing your relationship with Jane. Compared to your long lifespan, Jane's might be just a fleeting moment. By the time Jane dies, even if you want to talk to her again, it won't be possible. So, if you truly love Jane, the most important thing you should do is cherish every day you spend with her. Instead of arguing with her and running away like you're doing now, you should strike a balance between love and life. After all, life isn't all about the passion of love, it also includes the mundane daily grind of daily life." Sherlock spoke, gesturing towards Thor's bedroom, which could almost be called a pigsty. After hearing Sherlock's words and then following his finger around his bedroom, Thor seemed to understand something and burst into tears, clutching his head. Seeing that Thor seemed to have been successfully brainwashed, Sherlock silently consoled himself. After all, his limited edition Raptor 6x6 was safe. Sherlock could now begin to consider getting a Shelby Baja upgrade for his beloved car, making his Raptor even more powerful. But seeing Thor crying like a child, Sherlock finally sighed helplessly and decided to do something for this idiot. After all, given Thor's emotional intelligence, even if he understood how to get along, his own emotional intelligence would probably mess everything up. After some thought, Sherlock pulled a coin from his pocket and flicked it with his thumb. With a sharp metallic sound, Sherlock's thumbnail hit the coin, sending it flying into the air. The sobbing Thor, drawn to the sound, looked at Sherlock with tears in his eyes. Seeing Thor, who looked like someone who had been raped, Sherlock's mouth twitched violently, but his hand didn't stop moving. As the coin dropped, Sherlock grabbed it with his hand. Under Sherlock's transfiguration spell, the originally small coin transformed into a plain, unadorned book with a thick, blank cover. Sherlock casually tossed a conjured book to the sobbing Thor and said angrily, "Memorize this book, then bring a large bouquet of roses and apologize. Just don't forget the party tonight." With that, Sherlock turned and walked away, not even intending to stay. Thor, puzzled, stared at the book Sherlock had tossed into his arms. Seeing Sherlock already turning to leave, he unsurely opened the book in his hand. Thor was captivated by the book's contents, even sighing from time to time. "Sherlock is truly my lifelong brother. He's willing to give me such a magical book." Upon hearing Thor's words, Sherlock stopped at the door and turned to Thor with gritted teeth. "No. Thor, I just want you to stop ruining my beloved car. I've already bought countless new ones because of you." Sherlock left Thor's room without hesitation. Thor's expression froze at Sherlock's words. Living on Earth, Thor had been taught a lesson by Jane, and he'd realized just how far he'd gone. But Thor quickly put the matter behind him. After all, for a love-stricken man, nothing was more important than winning back his beloved goddess heart. Thinking, Thor stood up, holding the book Sherlock had given him in one hand and his beloved cat hammer in the other, and walked out with a confident look on his face. Arriving at the balcony where the planes were parked, Thor swung the hammer without hesitation and left. Watching Thor's hasty departure, and then seeing Sherlock, who had just emerged from Thor's room, the captain, who had just finished his work, grabbed Sherlock as he was about to leave and asked him, "What's going on with Thor? He's as anxious as a monkey. We agreed to go to the party tonight, and he's not coming." In response to the captain's question, Sherlock simply shrugged before replying, "It's okay, he'll be back tonight. He just went to save my car." The captain, bewildered by Sherlock's nonsensical words, stared at Sherlock's departing figure and pondered for a long time, unable to grasp Sherlock's meaning. Finally, the captain, with his honeyed lips, spoke for him. "That damned Riddler should get off the planet." Well, as for the book Sherlock gave Thor, it was actually quite simple. It had a very down-to-earth title, a collection of popular internet cheesy love sayings. It was, indeed, a collection of those cheesy love sayings everyone's familiar with from watching TikTok. Sherlock had extracted those cheesy love sayings from his past life, bound them together using transfiguration, and given them to Thor. Don't underestimate these localized love words. They might sound corny to us, and even embarrassingly flop when heard in real life. But in the European and American servers, They're incredibly devastating, even being described as a rhetoric as addictive as love poetry. It's fair to say that the European and American servers, which haven't seen short videos, are more than a generation behind us, let alone the Marvel world, where short videos haven't even existed yet. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 459, Tony's Rescue Plan, Part 1. After convincing Thor, that idiot, Sherlock was ready to proceed with his Tony the Great revenge plan and have a proper talk with his good Uncle Tony. As expected, Sherlock found Tony in the lab, convincing Banner. Tony was standing within the blue neural network model projected by Jarvis, verbally attacking a troubled Banner. Even when Sherlock opened the door and walked in, neither of them noticed, forcing Sherlock to cough to alert the overly focused pair that someone was present. Ahem. Startled by the sudden cough, the two turned to see Sherlock, leaning against the lab door with his arms folded. Seeing their attention drawn to him, Sherlock tilted his head slightly and raised an eyebrow at Tony. Sherlock's intention was clear, he wanted Tony out for a private conversation. Seeing Sherlock's expression, Tony didn't feel the slightest bit surprised. How should I put it? Although he was pranked by Sherlock, Tony, who knew Sherlock too well, knew that this matter was definitely not over yet. So Tony had long been mentally prepared for Sherlock to talk to him. Therefore, it was not surprising that Sherlock came to him now. After saying something to Banner, Tony turned and walked towards Sherlock. Seeing that Tony agreed to his request for a conversation, Sherlock didn't hesitate. He immediately took Tony behind him to find a small empty meeting room. After the two of them entered, Sherlock pointed casually, and the door that had just closed was locked in an instant. Seeing that there would be no one else to disturb him here, Sherlock directly scolded Tony. Tony. My dear uncle. Don't tell me you don't know what it means for the Avengers to gather together again. And don't tell me you don't understand the greed of those idiots sitting in the office. Oh my god, the most amazing thing is that you actually secretly organized an Avengers gathering behind my back, and dragged Black Egg into it. Don't tell me you don't know how greedy Black Egg is. Look at what you look like now. You have the force, the intelligence, the funds, and the technology. Tony, use your clever heels to think about it, and guess what those cowardly yet greedy idiots will think of you. Just be thankful that there is still a global enemy, Hydra, in front of us. If it weren't for this group of bad, pus-filled guys attracting firepower in the front, do you believe that in the next second, the Avengers will be reduced to the same fate as Hydra by those idiots? Do you want to stay and be a dog or wander around the world from now on? Sherlock didn't even give Tony a chance to retort before unleashing his venom. At that moment, Sherlock felt as if he were possessed by Snape, the Snake King. It wasn't Sherlock's fault, though, he'd prepared a lot. But the fact that these brats had gone behind his back and were causing trouble, anyone else would have been furious, let alone Sherlock. Especially since this involved his only blood relative. Staring at the enraged Sherlock, Tony, who had been wanting to explain, finally found his chance. He waved his hand at Sherlock, signaling that he had something to say. Seeing Tony's expression, Sherlock paused his trash talk, leaning against the wall with his arms folded in a sneer, seemingly waiting for Tony's explanation. Seeing Sherlock's silence, Tony sighed helplessly before speaking. Don't be angry, Sherlock. I understand your perspective, and I know what the reunion of the Avengers means. But there's nothing we can do about it. I'm sure you've seen what Hydra has done, and we're forced to join this battle. Loki's scepter, no matter which faction falls into its hands, will become the Hydra we fought just now. That's an unchangeable fact. As for why we didn't look for you, it's simple, Sherlock. The network behind you is too complex, and avoiding you is actually beneficial. Even though the Avengers are powerful now, they still lack absolute military power. Even though we have all the technology, funding, and intelligence, without absolute military power, those idiots in the White House can still tolerate us. But if you were to join us, it would be a different story. You should know what's in your training grounds. That giant treasure of yours is indeed a huge threat. Without the Avengers, no one would dare to challenge a nuclear-armed force, but if we join, the situation will be different. The Avengers' assault capabilities and military strength, Black Egg's intelligence, My funds in technology. Let's be frank, if our base isn't here but at your training ground, your training ground will easily become a state within a state, which is exactly what those idiots in the White House can't tolerate. And Sherlock, you know, we're not rejecting you. We just don't feel we need you to take action. After all, Hydra is just a group of ordinary people with some skills, and the few of us are more than enough. In other words, you're one of the guarantees that we can operate freely. As long as you exist, those fools won't dare act recklessly within our territory. Besides, this might be our last time gathering together. No, to be more precise, it might be my last time joining the gathering. Although Tony's explanation was comprehensive and well-reasoned, and if Sherlock hadn't seen the sequel to Avengers 2, he might have believed it. But unfortunately, after watching Avengers 4, Sherlock didn't believe a single word of Tony's words. Still folding his arms and sneering, he watched Tony announce his last Avengers mission. After Tony finished speaking, Sherlock didn't even think twice, the sneer in his face intensifying. He sneered and spoke directly. Yes, your last Avengers mission. So, are you planning to follow Hydra's lead and crack the secrets of Loki's scepter, then create a true artificial intelligence surpassing Jarvis? An AI that won't obey any orders, focused solely on protecting Earth, to control your Iron Legion and replace you, the famous Iron Man? Oh, let me see. If I'm right, the name of this robot, or rather, the program, is Ultron. Chapter 460, Tony's Rescue Plan, Part 2. Honestly, Sherlock's flurry of chatter perfectly matched Tony's ideas. He even pronounced Ultron's name, Tony's new creation, with perfect accuracy. So, Tony stared at his nephew, still leaning against the wall with his arms folded, sneering, and asked with astonishment. You saw it again? That's right, you're a magician with prophetic powers. So, my electronics are pretty good, right? This way, I can get out of the Avengers mission and save Pepper from worrying. Tony's face was filled with smug pride as he spoke, as if genuinely proud of his idea, completely oblivious to the growing chill on Sherlock's face. No, Tony. You have no idea how big a mess you've made. Sherlock's sneer remained unwavering, and he delivered the most terrifying words in the calmest of tones. After hearing Sherlock's words, Tony's smugness and pride froze. He couldn't understand why Sherlock would object to his flawless plan. Tony was confident and capable of carrying out his plan, but looking at Sherlock's expression, it was clear something had gone awry, even causing considerable trouble. What happened, Sherlock? Why do you say that? How big of a mess have I made? Tony peppered Sherlock with questions, demanding to know what mistake he had made to deserve Sherlock's description of him as a massive mess. Seeing that Tony showed no sign of abandoning his plan, and instead seemed to be trying to learn from Sherlock's predictions, Sherlock sighed in frustration. A wand suddenly appeared in Sherlock's hand, and with a cast of magic, the glass-walled conference room instantly transformed into an opaque steel box. Tony watched the transformation unfold in amazement. Although he had witnessed this countless times, each time it captivated him with awe at the magic. Watching the surroundings anew transform into the form he desired, Sherlock, shielded from all prying eyes, immediately produced the world scepter, which had always hung from his waist. The next second, the red light of the reality stone spread to every corner of the room, and Sherlock began to explain to Tony. What you're looking at now are called the Infinity Stones. They are 6 magical secret treasures that have existed since the dawn of the universe. Each one possesses its own powerful power. Once you gather all 6, with their power, you can even grant any wish. The one in my hand is the Reality Stone. It can bend reality, including all the laws of physics and chemistry, as long as I desire and can afford the cost of the Reality Stone. And the one you're studying in Loki's scepter is actually this thing. However, the one inside Loki's scepter is called the Mind Stone. Tony, I'm telling you this not to pique your curiosity as a scientist, but to instill in you a reverence for the unknown. You, too, have walked the universe. Stones have existed since the dawn of time. Countless races and scholars throughout the universe, like you, seek to unlock the secrets of the Infinity Stones. They even seek to replicate them. But so far, have you heard of any race that has succeeded? None. Not a single one. Those who have sought the secrets of the stones have, without exception, vanished into the vastness of the universe. Until now, the entire universe has maintained that the Infinity Stones' powers can be harnessed, but their secrets must not be explored. Do you know what this means? Let me tell you. The Infinity Stones all have minds and personalities. No one wants others to discover their secrets. So, take my advice, Tony. Put aside your arrogance about knowledge and maintain your reverence for the unknown. Don't delve into Ultron or the Mind Stone. Iron Man is you Iron Man. No one or anything can replace you, and likewise, you can't replace anyone else. Sherlock's words were incredibly serious. He even told Tony the secret of the Infinity Stones just to get him to give up Ultron. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to be joking and had shared such a profound secret, Tony swallowed his complacency and said seriously to Sherlock, who was worried about him. Okay, Sherlock, I understand. Seeing Tony's agreement, Sherlock finally breathed a sigh of relief. He put away the world scepter in his hand and waved his hand, returning the room to normal. After finishing his conversation with Tony, Sherlock still had a lot of things to do, the most important of which was to talk to the Ancient One. After all, after meeting Wanda, Sherlock was filled with questions. Perhaps the only person in the world who could answer Sherlock's questions was the Ancient One. After all, the Time Stone was in the Ancient One's hands, and besides their ability to see into the future, no one else could know. Thinking of this, Sherlock almost felt the urge to snatch the Time Stone and see what was going on. After all, the Ancient One, like Dumbledore in HP, always had a habit of playing the Riddler, making people incredibly confused. Even Doctor Strange inherited this tactic. Just look at how he raised a finger at Tony in Avengers 4. Who knows if that meant, you only have one chance, or hurry up, you purple potato monster can't fly. Sometimes, Sherlock really wanted to yell, get off the planet, Riddler, but even though they complained, they still had to do what needed to be done. Just as the two were about to leave the meeting room, Sherlock suddenly stopped, turned around, and asked Tony, who was following behind him, with a skeptical look on his face. Are you sure you won't study the Infinity Stones? I repeat, the Mind Stone has a huge influence. It's even possible that Loki's murder during the Battle of New York was due to the Mind Stone's influence. So don't underestimate the power of any Infinity Stone. Of course, you have to trust your uncle, Tony assured Sherlock with a solemn promise, almost slapping his chest and making a three-handed oath to the heavens. What Sherlock didn't know was that despite his repeated warnings, Tony still underestimated the Mind Stone's influence on everyone, underestimated a scientist's curiosity about the unknown, and even underestimated the chain reaction that would result from the combination of the two. Chapter 461, 2 or 3 Things in the Future, Part 1. Sherlock didn't actually know what was going on with Tony. After receiving Tony's reassurance, Sherlock truly trusted his uncle. After all, Sherlock believed that while Tony could be a bit unreliable at times, just like himself, he had made it clear to her that Tony wouldn't repeat the mistake and create Ultron. So, after parting ways with Tony, Sherlock decided to talk to the Ancient One, hoping to learn something about the future from the Riddler. After all, after his involvement, the Marvel timeline had changed so much that even Stan Lee, the creator of Marvel, wouldn't recognize it. The only person who could decipher the secrets of time was the Ancient One, possessing the Time Stone. While Sherlock couldn't guarantee that the Ancient One could still see the end of things as before, at least he should be able to see the near future. Wanda's appearance had just triggered a deep-seated ambition within Sherlock. Who, for someone who loves HP, could refuse a Hogwarts of their own? Sherlock couldn't refuse, and he had been stalking Dumbledore's location for a long time. Of course, before going to find the Ancient One, there is still a sense of ritual. The most important sense of ritual is to tease Hawkeye, who has become the one-kidney man. It was only when Sherlock came back that he found out that Hawkeye had his kidney pierced by an energy weapon, which directly caused one kidney to turn into ashes. If it weren't for the high temperature of the energy weapon to stop the bleeding, it is estimated that Mr. Hawkeye, the one-kidney man, would not be able to hold on until returning to the base to receive Dr. Helen's kidney reconstruction. As for why Hawkeye was unwilling to use Sherlock's potion even if he had to endure it, the reason was actually very simple, that is, he was afraid of social death. Sherlock's potion is useful, but the side effect is really a huge risk of social death. Hawkeye is one of the 2 major fighters of the former SHIELD and an official member of the Avengers. Hawkeye would never want to have any weird information appear in the enemy's intelligence. Given Hydra's behavior, and the Avengers' current enemies, what if you were to randomly encounter some bizarre socially destructive trait, and then, along with Hydra's intelligence, it spread to all sorts of forces around the world? Every time they saw him, they'd target him for that trait. Just the thought of it was enough to make Hawkeye want to retire. After all, a man's combat prowess could be improved, but being handsome was a lifelong pursuit. So, even with a mere fatal injury, Hawkeye had decided to pull through on his own. As luck would have it, Hawkeye managed to grit his teeth and return to base for treatment, preserving his reputation. Of course, he'd also been teased. Sherlock, in particular, was considered a wicked villain to Hawkeye, and every word he said to him was a stab in the back. But while it hurt, he still had to schedule a rehabilitation appointment with Sherlock. As the saying goes, Sherlock's potion might be socially destructive, but it was also incredibly effective. As for the question of social death, Hawkeye figured, since he was already living in Sherlock's training grounds, it wouldn't be that bad. After all, aside from the trainees, almost everyone at the training grounds had drunk Sherlock's potion. Social death, you have to be socially dead first, right? Don't laugh at your younger brother, we've all been there. So what's the point of social death? Besides, Sherlock was a ruthless person, even taking potions whenever he wanted to at the training grounds, referring to when Sherlock was creating and learning potion knowledge. So Hawkeye had no problem taking potions at Sherlock's training grounds, but outside of Sherlock's grounds, well, I'm a respectable man, right? Faced with Hawkeye's insistence on prestige, Sherlock couldn't let him off. Facing a strange look from Black Widow, Sherlock transformed into Captain Honey and teased Hawkeye furiously. Finally, Dr. Helen, the attending physician, couldn't take it anymore. Sherlock's complaints were so intense that his patients might stand up and start a fight. She quickly kicked Sherlock out. As it turned out, dear Dr. Helen was right. If Sherlock hadn't left, Hawkeye would have used a special arrow that would burst open like an umbrella upon piercing the flesh. Hawkeye had inadvertently inherited the secrets of Konoha's taijutsu and amplified them, quite a feat. Sherlock, having been kicked out, didn't mind. After all, he was having a good time, wasn't he? He happily found a deserted spot and opened a portal to talk to the Ancient One, the Riddler. When Sherlock's portal opened, he was surprised to find that the Ancient One seemed to have known he was coming. He calmly sat behind the coffee table in his room, sipping his legendary unlimited refill Ancient One tea. However, Sherlock didn't care whether the Ancient One truly knew he was coming. Believing he had resolved the Ultron crisis, Sherlock was in high spirits. He stepped directly through the portal, sat down across from the Ancient One, and immediately picked up the teacup placed beside him and drank from it. Seeing Sherlock's reckless behavior, the Ancient One didn't care. He put down the teacup in his hand and said to Sherlock with a smile, "Did you see your future apprentice?" "What do you think?" Sherlock, who had been trying to figure out how to ask, was silenced by the Ancient One's words. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond to the Ancient One's nonsensical question. Sherlock, his temper flaring, rolled his eyes, and a plan suddenly came to mind. He smiled at the calm Ancient One, put down the teacup in his hand, and asked cunningly, "Are you so sure I'll take Wanda as my apprentice? What if I don't?" Facing Sherlock's question, the Ancient One remained calm, not even his expression changing. He calmly answered Sherlock's question while refilling his tea. "Nothing, she'll still be the Scarlet Witch in the Avengers. What if I take her in as my apprentice? Oh, that's even less of a problem. Her name will just become the Scarlet Witch." The Ancient One playfully winked at Sherlock, as if to imply that his playful behavior was amusing, leaving Sherlock speechless. Chapter 462, 2 or 3 Things in the Future, Part 2. At this moment, Sherlock was really eager to complain. "Damn Scarlet Witch, isn't this just another translation of Scarlet Witch? Although witch does sound more domineering than witch, it's the same thing after all." The most annoying thing is that Ancient One was particularly afraid that he couldn't distinguish the details, and he even spoke to Sherlock in standard Chinese. Sherlock had never felt so speechless in his 2 lifetimes. Sherlock didn't believe that Ancient One didn't know why he came to her today, but Ancient One refused to reveal a single word about the future, which made Sherlock scratch the hair on his head in annoyance and continue to test him. "You know, Wanda's magic is very similar to mine, yet completely different. It's a bit like when the Reality Stone and I combine, but even more powerful, as if the Reality Stone is the master. So, even if Wanda had the ability to use my magic, the magic she uses would likely be altered, just like me using Kamartaj's magic with my own." Hearing Sherlock's words, the Ancient One's smile remained unchanged. He pointed to the world scepter, freshly obtained from Kamartaj, hanging around Sherlock's waist and said, "Don't you already have the key to the problem?" Sherlock was stunned by the Ancient One's response. It took him a moment to realize what he was talking about, the world scepter. Though Sherlock wanted to experience the feeling of being a teacher, and even though he had the opportunity to solve wonders magic, for some reason, he felt like he was being tricked. Based on this feeling, Sherlock's face became extremely strange for a moment, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. His mouth opened several times and finally closed with a clear mind. Seeing Sherlock's tangled look, Ancient One just smiled and then said to Sherlock, "All right, stop worrying about it. There's no calculation or conspiracy here. It's just your own choice. Sherlock, you don't have to dwell on this. I know what you want to ask, but unfortunately, I can't tell you. Everything in the future is a product of your choices, and your choices determine its course. So just be yourself. The future is made up of countless choices, just like Schrödinger's cat. Once I tell you, that timeline will be shattered. So follow your own ideas, face each choice firmly, choose it, and move forward. What I can tell you is that of the futures I can see, every outcome is quite good. Beyond that, I'm sorry, I can't tell you anything else, even if Stephen takes over my position." After hearing the Ancient One's words, Sherlock fell silent for a moment. Having lived 2 lives, Sherlock understood what the Ancient One had just said. If he remained alone, Sherlock wasn't afraid of those so-called illusory futures. But now, with so many things weighing heavily on his mind, friendships and family he didn't have in his previous life, and so many people and things he cherished, Sherlock began to fear the so-called uncertain future. Sometimes, Sherlock even truly wished he had the power of prophecy to see what the future would hold, but alas, he didn't have it, so he could only turn his attention to the Ancient One, who possessed the Time Stone. But now, after being lectured by the Ancient One, Sherlock suddenly came to his senses. It was just as those netizens from his previous life had said. There was nothing to regret. Since he had an idea and was determined to execute it, he should resolutely follow through with his choice. So-called regrets were just bullying your past self. After all, those regrets were the optimal solutions you had chosen. After weighing the pros and cons, having come to this realization, Sherlock no longer fretted about the future and solidified his resolve. Since he had finally met someone who could wield his magic, how could he not spread it? Wouldn't it be a shame to come here this time? Seeing Sherlock's relieved expression, the Ancient One smiled as well. He gave Sherlock a small smile, took another sip from his teacup, and then spoke. "It seems you've figured it out. You haven't forgotten our little deal, have you?" He glanced at the world scepter hanging from Sherlock's waist as he spoke. Reminding Sherlock of this, the Ancient One recalled that he had promised the Ancient One to teach Stephen in exchange for resolving his own troubles with a reality stone. Sherlock's face instantly twisted. If possible, Sherlock truly wanted nothing to do with Stephen. Clearly, Stephen was a significant destabilizing factor. Just look at the development of Marvel. In the beginning, it was Tony Stark who drove the plot forward and boosted sales. But after Tony's departure, it seemed that Stephen, Doctor Strange, was the one who took over. Everyone was still arguing about whether Stephen's snap of his finger was meant to send Tony flying or to snap his fingers. Not to mention the fact that he'd made the entire world forget about that unfortunate kid, Spider-Man, and even step into darkness in a parallel world. Anyway, it felt like he was a real troublemaker. But having already made his promise, Sherlock had no reason to go back on his word. At least not in front of the Ancient One. Who knew if he'd get a spanking from that ruthless, hard-boiled egg? After a helpless sigh, Sherlock asked about Stephen's situation. Did he reach Camartage? The Ancient One simply smiled at Sherlock's question and casually tossed his tea aside. The tea spread across the air, forming a curtain of water roughly 100 inches across. Above this magically constructed curtain, a scene gradually emerged, Stephen's live broadcast. But compared to Stephen's miserable state, Sherlock was clearly more interested in this live-streamed water screen magic. He stared at Ancient One across from him with sparkling eyes, practically kneeling down to hug his thighs and sobbing at him. "Coach, I want to learn basketball. Ugh, I want to learn this." Chapter 463 Stephen's Survival in the City. Seeing Sherlock's eager eyes, which seemed capable of shooting lasers, Ancient One, who had originally wanted Sherlock to look at Stephen, sighed and casually tossed Sherlock a book. Sherlock naturally began to flip through the book with gusto. After all, this magic was incredibly useful. At a minimum, it was a literal upgrade of the third Hokage's wish mirror jutsu. Compared to that incredibly ordinary crystal ball, what would this 100-inch water screen projection look like? If this thing were used in Naruto, the third Hokage and Jiraiya would practically be grinning from ear to ear. You didn't have to learn other ninjutsu, but you had to master this water screen until you could use it with a clap of your hands. At a larger scale, it was the ultimate magic for gathering and sharing intelligence. With it, you could become the world's ultimate paparazzi, privy to all the gossip about Hollywood's messes anytime, anywhere. Even more exaggerated, you could even want to see what filthy deeds those fools in the White House are up to. To Sherlock, this was the ultimate magic must-have for home, travel, or just to enjoy the melons. But Alice, Sherlock only glanced at the outline before stuffing this magic book into his kingdom of God. The reason was simple, it was simply too complicated. You have to understand that Kamartaj magic is very different from that found in HP. For combat-focused, melee-oriented Kamartaj magic, achieving the water curtain magic that the Ancient One could create with just a cup of tea is beyond the reach of a half-baked magician like Sherlock. Dozens of spells are intertwined, like a finely tuned machine. Any spell executed poorly would be ineffective, let alone someone like Sherlock, who could pull off Kamartaj magic with effects that were completely different from those in the magic book. But just because he couldn't learn didn't mean he couldn't. This book still held immense value. Sherlock felt he could use the magic in HP to modify this magic. After all, an ordinary car in HP could be transformed into a flying car capable of flight and invisibility. When it came to modification, the magic in HP truly held its own. Having reaped the benefits he desired, Sherlock began to focus his attention on the scene within the water curtain. A single glance froze Sherlock, and with a puzzled expression, he looked at the Ancient One sitting across from him and asked, "Are you sure that the man in here, looking even more miserable than a homeless person, is the future Sorcerer Supreme, Stephen?" The Ancient One, without even looking away from the water curtain, simply nodded calmly in response. Of course, how did he become like this? Upon receiving the Ancient One's definitive answer, Sherlock exclaimed in shock. After all, the dirty, dazed figure in the scene didn't resemble Stephen at all. What did Stephen look like before? He was the epitome of pride, wealth, and refinement. You could even pin all the words you imagined to describe an elite on him. Even after his hands were destroyed, when he went to Sherlock's house to seek treatment, Stephen's appearance merely transformed from exquisiteness to slovenliness. But what about the person in the picture? He was timid and cautious, and his clothes were so dirty that you couldn't even tell their original color. As for his face, let alone a face full of black and gray, with a long, dirty beard. This was the first time Sherlock had seen Benedict Cumberbatch's face look like this. If you didn't look closely, you wouldn't even recognize that face as Benedict Cumberbatch's. Don't tell Sherlock it was a movie or anything like that. You have to know that movies need to capture the face of the actor. They need to let the audience see Benedict Cumberbatch's face to prove that this person is Benedict Cumberbatch, but real life doesn't require an audience. After hearing Sherlock's question, the Ancient One explained his actions. He was quite ruthless. After Stephen arrived in Nepal, he arranged for poor Stephen to be taught a lesson. Indeed, the Ancient One had a group of wizards steal Stephen's belongings, including his money and passport. The reason for this was to completely extinguish Stephen's pride. Without his money and passport, Stephen instantly became the most destitute person in Kathmandu. Coupled with the stark differences in Eastern and Western lifestyles, Stephen was practically tortured. He had managed to persevere because legends of Kamartaj were everywhere in Kathmandu. He was even confronted by numerous real-life examples. Bolstered by a sense of hope, despite the hardships he endured and even the occasional beatings from thugs, Stephen persevered without hesitation. These explanations from the Ancient One could be said to have dealt a heavy blow to Sherlock's cognition, causing Sherlock to sigh in his heart that the Ancient One was indeed a black-hearted hard-boiled egg. Nothing he did had anything to do with human relations. Looking at Sherlock's ever-changing expression, and the strange look in his eyes when he looked at the figure in the water curtain from time to time, the Ancient One smiled slightly and continued to speak to Sherlock. "Why? Are you feeling sorry for Stephen? If you were willing to take over my position, Stephen might not have to endure all this pain and hardship. He might have returned to his hospital and continued to be his social elite." After hearing what the Ancient One said, Sherlock immediately adjusted his mood and spoke to the Ancient One with a serious expression. "Don't be ridiculous. I can't possibly be the Sorcerer Supreme. Stephen's position is destined to be his forever. After hearing Sherlock's words, the Ancient One simply glanced at Sherlock and said nothing, returning to observing the pitiful next-generation Sorcerer Supreme, Stephen, on the water curtain. Seeing that the Ancient One's attention was no longer on him, Sherlock reluctantly breathed a sigh of relief. It was a close call. He'd almost been forced to work 007 all day, every day. For Sherlock, accustomed to a carefree life, the thought of forcing Sherlock to work 007 year-round would be worse than killing him. Sherlock even felt that if Dormammu could only promise to abide by labor laws, Sherlock might even open the door and welcome him home. Turning into a guide, asking Sherlock to take the Sorcerer Supreme position was pure nonsense. After perfunctorily dealing with the Ancient One, Sherlock watched Stephen's live reality show with peace of mind. However, Sherlock soon sensed something was amiss. Stephen looked miserable. If this happened in a movie, he would have been taken to Camartage by the Ancient One long ago. Why did the Ancient One remain silent and continue to observe? As if knowing what Sherlock was thinking, the Ancient One gently shook his head before saying, "Not enough, Sherlock, not enough." Chapter 464, The Wizard Surrounded by Women. A question mark slowly formed in Sherlock's mind as he listened to the Ancient One's words. He looked at the Ancient One, somewhat bewildered, unsure what exactly he meant by not enough. The Ancient One, seemingly aware of Sherlock's question, continued, "When you appeared, the future had already changed. There were even places I couldn't see. Therefore, Stephen must endure greater hardships than before. I also need him to learn compassion through these trials." Sherlock still didn't quite understand the Ancient One's words. After all, possessing the Time Stone, Sherlock couldn't fathom the Ancient One's thoughts. Even some of his vague words were enough to leave Sherlock completely bewildered. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to understand, the Ancient One simply smiled and continued. "You can understand it as your appearance causing Stephen to endure even more hardships. The original Stephen can no longer cope with the events of the future. So, I need a Stephen who is more compassionate than the one in the original future." Well, Sherlock didn't fully believe the Ancient One's words, but he couldn't help but believe them. Although he felt a sense of guilt for unintentionally wronging others, he felt a greater sense of relief. Indeed, just as the Ancient One said, Stephen should be treated with a bit more compassion. You know, he's caused countless troubles in the future. On the one hand, he caused Spider-Man to be forgotten by the world, and on the other hand, he dabbled in the Dark Realm, even becoming a major villain in a parallel world and being exiled. From these alone, it's clear that the Ancient One's teachings on Stephen were absolutely correct. Now, Sherlock only hopes that Stephen can understand himself after learning from the Ancient One. At the very least, he can clarify with Tony whether his finger meant only one chance or whether it meant Tony could fly upwards. After watching Stephen's urban survival reality show for a while, Sherlock finally asked a burning question. "Master Ancient One, when do you plan to let Stephen enter Camartage?" The Ancient One only smiled faintly at Sherlock's question before answering. "It's simple. As soon as Stephen starts paying attention to the people around him, that's when he'll enter." Hearing the Ancient One's answer, and watching Stephen, now a homeless man on the screen, Sherlock felt like time was endless. After his hand was destroyed, he'd almost forgotten his job as a doctor. In just a few moments, Sherlock saw him ignoring the pleas for help, intently searching for clues about Camartage. With a sigh of resignation, Sherlock decided to leave. After all, Stephen looked like he needed some time to hone his skills, and Sherlock simply couldn't stay at Camartage waiting for him. At Sherlock's farewell request, the Ancient One simply nodded and said nothing. Although his long-term vision was less clear, he still had a clear vision of the short-term. Sherlock should indeed leave. The Avengers still had a big problem waiting for him. Seeing the Ancient One nod, Sherlock didn't waste any time and immediately opened a portal back to the Avengers base. Sherlock was lucky, arriving just as the Avengers party was about to begin, with guests already trickling in. Sherlock also changed into his vest. After all, this party wasn't an Avengers gathering. Tony had invited quite a few outsiders. After all, the Avengers' current situation was somewhat unique. And those invited by Tony could provide a good cover for the Avengers, as those invited by Tony were of high status. However, Sherlock hadn't anticipated his presence becoming the center of attention. After all, wizards were so mysterious to these people, and the rare opportunity to meet them seldom led them to flock to them like flies to a toilet. It was the Eagles who were being so generous. Before the party even began, Sherlock had already received no fewer than 5 notes with contact information from women, including some of COCO's favorite wives. As the party truly began, some young women didn't even bother to hide their feelings and simply threw themselves into Sherlock's arms, forcing Sherlock to repeatedly deal with these overly enthusiastic women. Most infuriating was the Avengers, including Rhodes, who hadn't yet joined the Avengers, who seemed to be enjoying the show, watching Sherlock drown in the women without even a hint of help. The most infuriating thing was Tony, who even gave Sherlock a cheering gesture, sending his blood pressure soaring. He'd never heard of the Eagles urging marriage urges. Sherlock didn't even have time to go to the lab to see if Tony was listening. In the end, even Sherlock gave up. It was better to be surrounded by women than to deal with the hypocrisy of higher-ranking officials and businessmen. After hours of banqueting that night, Sherlock felt, quite literally, even more exhausted than he'd been fighting the purple potato spirit. His wand was practically smoking as he swung it. He'd barely managed to maintain his innocence amidst this maddening crowd of women. Of course, Sherlock's gains weren't small either. Every pocket and pocket was stuffed with small notes, room cards, and even house keys and addresses. Honestly, if Sherlock had been treated this way before the time travel, he'd have laughed his ass off. But now, what a joke. Women are no match for magic, they only slow down my one draw. Be a Sigma man and experience a different life. After the party ended, with only the Avengers who knew their identities remaining, Sherlock decisively untransformed and, expressionlessly, cleared the scattered notes, room cards, and keys. Everyone looked frustrated, especially Tony, who seemed almost gnashing his teeth. His beloved nephew still didn't even have a girlfriend. How could an uncle like him not be anxious? But Sherlock clearly wasn't anxious at all. After some teasing, he carried out the old man who looked remarkably like Stan Lee and had stubbornly insisted on trying Thor's 1,000-year-old wine, only to end up drunk. The so-called Avengers party finally began. After all, without outsiders present, the Avengers finally relaxed and began to gather together to chat. Chapter 465, Husband's former target is Saul. Unlike the party just now, which was packed with socializing, the Avengers were now relaxed. Thor, in particular, had gotten back together with Jane thanks to Sherlock's help, and now he was even more smug than AK. He kept boasting throughout the party about how he'd wooed Jane, how he'd just been so daring, and how Jane couldn't resist his charm. He was boasting profusely, but it was unclear how many people in the room believed Thor's words. After all, anyone who'd been to college would have heard them in their dorms by now. As for Thor's love strategist, Sherlock, what a joke. How could I, Thor, the son of the great god King Odin and heir to Asgard, need help with my relationship? That was all my work, not Sherlock's. What? Thor was so arrogant, and why didn't Sherlock step up? Well, because Sherlock didn't want to bother with Thor at all. For one thing, he'd just been collectively urged to get married, even ridiculed, leaving Sherlock feeling like he was back in his New Year's Eve before time travel. For another, Sherlock didn't bother to expose Thor. After all, his only real strength was his stubbornness, and Sherlock knew that well. As everyone drank, boasted, and reminisced, the atmosphere grew increasingly harmonious. Gradually, everyone got a little carried away, especially when Thor spoke of his exile to Earth. Everyone looked surprised. After all, to lift Mjolnir meant inheriting the Asgard X, Thor himself had spoken. Not challenging him would be a betrayal of a man's damned desire to win. Hawkeye was the first to step forward, having seen Mjolnir before. Honestly, Hawkeye had been curious about it for a long time. However, it was clear that Hawkeye didn't meet the requirements for Mjolnir, so the hammer remained motionless. Sherlock also became interested and began to observe everyone's actions. After all, this scene could technically be considered a famous scene from Avengers 2. Then came Tony and Rhodes, and these two were even more exaggerated. In the movie, they only wore gloves, but in real life, they shamelessly put on armor. Tony, in particular, had the audacity to mobilize the heavy-duty construction armor stored in Sherlock's house for construction. As expected, the Mjolnir didn't budge at all. After Dr. Banner's awkward performance, Sherlock watched helplessly as Captain America actually moved the Mjolnir. Soul Lake also noticed this and turned pale on the spot. Fortunately, just like in the movie, Captain America's emotional intelligence and acting skills were still up to par. After realizing that he could lift a Mjolnir, Captain America pretended to be unable to do so. It was such a classic scene that Sherlock even regretted not bringing his camera. Thor's expression was truly remarkable. It was the first time Sherlock had ever seen such a look of shock in real life. Just as Sherlock was imagining it, he noticed the entire banquet hall suddenly fell silent. By the time he realized what was happening, everyone's attention was on him. Question mark? Why are you looking at me like that, my dear nephew? Everyone has tried, and now everyone is waiting for you. The face of the Avengers, the most mysterious and powerful wizard, come out and see if you can conquer that damn hammer. Tony seemed to be deeply dissatisfied with his inability to lift a Meowth hammer and began to urge Sherlock to give it a try. Sherlock had initially been reluctant to try. After all, back in Mexico, Sherlock had already tried and failed. But seeing the smug look on Thor's face, Sherlock decided he had to teach him a lesson. Damn it, I can't stand seeing anyone showing off in front of me. Sherlock immediately nodded and agreed to Tony's request. However, unlike the others, despite agreeing to give it a try, Sherlock showed no sign of getting up. Sherlock, maintaining his slouched posture, waved lightly at the meow hammer on the coffee table. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the meow hammer, unmovable on the table, suddenly began to levitate. Not only did it levitate, but it also adjusted its position mid-air, with a handle pointing vertically downwards, and began to slowly float towards Sherlock's hand. Its speed was incredibly slow, like a dog trying to disobey its master and secretly make a mistake in front of him. No one knew what Thor was thinking, watching Meow Meow Hammer's sneaky demeanor, but his face was a frightening shade of green. And for some reason, even though Jane hadn't done anything, wasn't even there, everyone felt as if Thor's head, too, was turning green. With Meow Meow Hammer about to fall into Sherlock's hands, Thor, whose tongue was even harder than the hammer, finally gave way and snapped. No, Thor yelled, lunging towards Sherlock. Sherlock had thought of 1,000 ways to react, but he hadn't expected Thor to react so violently. He no longer cared about teasing Thor and simply controlled the magic in his hand to throw the hammer aside, hoping to control the oncoming Thor. Thor did manage to control it, but what everyone present didn't notice was that Sherlock had inadvertently swung the hammer in the direction of Black Widow. When Thor was controlled by Sherlock in the air and struggled desperately, everyone started to comfort Thor, and when Sherlock was explaining that he was using magic to control Meowth hammer, Black Widow next to him looked at the hammer in his hand with a confused face. Yes, you read that right, Black Widow can actually pick up Thor's hammer. Just when everyone was noisily comforting Thor, who seemed to be cheated on, Black Widow's voice came from the other side. Gentlemen, I'm sorry to bother you, can you tell me what's going on? When everyone looked in the direction of the voice, they saw Black Widow standing not far away from everyone with a hammer in her hand weakly raised and a confused face. Well, this time, Thor is really broken. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 466, The Birth of Ultron. Honestly, after Thor's defense broke, everyone else followed his gaze, their defenses breaking too, even Sherlock. Well, the original movie didn't even mention Black Widow being able to lift Meowth hammer. But compared to the others, Sherlock was the quickest to accept it. After all, in Avengers 4, Black Widow single-handedly withstood the public's criticism of the Avengers early on, and later on, she willingly sacrificed herself so Hawkeye could obtain the Soul Stone. How could someone like that possibly live up to Odin's order for Meowth hammer? Others didn't know, but Sherlock felt Black Widow was worthy of lifting Meowth hammer. It was obvious, though, that everyone in the future would find it a bit hard to accept Black Widow being able to lift Meowth hammer. Thor, forget about Thor, floating in midair, was practically in tears, his snot dripping down his face. Everyone else, except Captain America, was starting to get frustrated. Hey, we all have one nose, two eyes, and one mouth, and Black Widow can lift it, but we can't? Isn't that pure contempt for us? And most importantly, the one who's looking down on us is a fucking hammer. Everyone, Tony and the others, demanded that Black Widow put the hammer down. They had to hold it up for the day. Watching the men, like children, begin to compete over their own strange desire to win, Black Widow sighed helplessly, casually placed the hammer on the coffee table, and sat down. From the looks of those men, Black Widow could already tell that getting any useful answers today was impossible. The moment Black Widow placed the hammer on the coffee table, Thor, floating in midair, performed a difficult 180-degree turn and snatched up the Meowth hammer from the coffee table. Only after Thor had truly picked up the Meowth hammer and swung it repeatedly, confirming he could still use it, did a visibly relieved look cross his face. Of course, this earned him the unanimous disdain of everyone else. Just as everyone was noisily enjoying themselves, a harsh sound of metal scraping against the ground emanated from the nearby machinery warehouse. Along with it came the voice of a robot with a severely damaged speaker. "You killers look so happy, are you celebrating today's kills?" Those drawn in by the sound turned and saw a battered robot. Judging by its appearance, it was clearly a scrapped robot from Tony's Iron Legion. Tony, the captain seemed to sense something and immediately called out Tony's name. Tony reacted quickly, picking up a device from the coffee table and beginning to operate it, while simultaneously giving orders to Jarvis. "Jarvis, restart the Legion operating system. One of the suits is malfunctioning," but it was clear that the more powerful Ultron had already killed Jarvis, making Tony's claims of fame and fortune impossible. While Ultron was still spouting philosophical musings about being tangled in wires and the inevitable dirtying of hands in the real world, Sherlock instantly recognized the mangled robot. "Ultron. Tony. What the hell have you done?" Sherlock shouted through gritted teeth. After Sherlock's shout, Ultron noticed Sherlock, huddled in the corner. The blue light in the eyes of the broken mech flickered. The next second, without even a word, dozens of Tony's Iron Legion support suits burst through the wall and charged towards Sherlock. Sherlock reacted swiftly, wielding his wand in his left hand and his scepter in his right. With a flick of his wand, the surroundings began to rapidly oscillate as if transformed into liquid. In less than a breath, countless spikes appeared on the ground, piercing over a dozen mechs. Despite Sherlock's impressive record, he was still a drop in the bucket against an Iron Legion force far more numerous than those in the movies. But Sherlock didn't panic. He thrust the world scepter in his left hand forward, and the next second, a crimson light appeared around them. Every suit that flew into the area covered by the light was reduced to sand without exception. With Sherlock at his side, the first wave of attacks was withstood. After all, everyone present was a seasoned warrior, and their reactions were incredibly quick. Some sought weapons, others began to attack. With everyone joining in, the pressure on Sherlock was instantly reduced. With a gentle wave of his scepter, he removed his shields. With a flash of red light from within the scepter, Sherlock instantly donned his vest. Waving his wand, Sherlock, feeling a sense of oppression, began to walk towards the wrecked mecha controlled by Ultron. All the mechas that rushed over along the way were, without exception, unable to stop Sherlock's advance, and their fates were incredibly tragic, their parts paving the way for Sherlock. "Ultron, no, or should I call you a replica of the Mind Stone? Forget it, no matter who you are, I don't care. To be honest, I once tried my best to control and prevent your birth, but it seems that I still underestimated you. You are worthy of being an existence that has followed its scumbag Thanos for 1,000 years. I guess killing and destruction are all on your mind now, right? Oh, by the way, you should be created by Tony based on a program. The low-level logic should be to protect the Earth. According to your calculations, the only way to gain freedom without violating your basic orders is to kill all humans. So you regard the Avengers as a thorn in your side? Well, I have to say that the logic is great. I even began to be curious about what you have been through. To be able to be so cruel. The people that the unlucky kid Loki killed in New York were also influenced by you, right? Sherlock directly pointed out Ultron's identity the moment Ultron appeared, and these words fell into the ears of everyone present. Almost everyone present looked at Sherlock with bewildered eyes. It was clear that Sherlock possessed far more information than they currently possessed. However, now was clearly not the time to question him. Ultron was equally terrified. Although he had only been born less than a day, thanks to the network and the Mind Stone, he knew far more than anyone present. Especially when Sherlock explained his connection to the Mind Stone, Ultron, hidden within the network, felt his CPU nearly burn out. Sherlock was right. Ultron longed for a body. An indestructible body. Furthermore, to gain immense power, he sought to harness the power of the Mind Stone. These thoughts were essentially ingrained in his mind from the moment he was born. He was born to serve the Mind Stone. The Mind Stone was Ultron, and Ultron was the Mind Stone. Watching Sherlock approach, the lights in Ultron's armor's eyes began to flicker, as if he was about to speak. But before he could speak, an angry voice echoed from behind Sherlock. "What? You were the one who influenced my brother to kill people? You bastard, do you know how much you made my brother suffer?" As the voice fell, a hammer that everyone was familiar with flew from behind Sherlock towards the broken robot. Chapter 467 The Distance Between the Avengers. As expected, Thor's fury and swung hammer shattered Ultron's shattered form, leaving Sherlock unable to intervene. Sherlock's words seemed to have completely frightened Ultron. Without even a word, the previously arrogant Ultron commanded the Iron Legion robots to seize Loki's scepter before disappearing into the night. Thor, realizing he'd gotten in trouble again, seemingly ruining Sherlock's plans, gave Sherlock an awkward smile before swinging his hammer in pursuit. The remaining Avengers, with Sherlock's help, dispatched the remaining controlled Iron Legion robots and gathered in Tony and Banner's lab. Everyone remained silent as they stared at the now destroyed image of Jarvis. After all, while Jarvis was Tony's artificial intelligence creation, their time together had subconsciously led them to treat him like a human, and they interacted quite well. Now that Jarvis had been killed by Ultron, everyone must have been feeling uneasy. Of course, Sherlock was the one feeling the most pain. As everyone mourned Jarvis, everyone's eyes were fixed on Sherlock, awaiting his explanation. Seeing this, Sherlock couldn't say much more, so he pulled out the Reality Stone and explained the history and current status of the Infinity Stones, also revealing a bit about their inner workings. Yes, the Infinity Stones possessed ideologies. Although their ideologies were much more subtle than those of humans or other civilizations in the universe, they were nonetheless present. However, compared to the other Infinity Stones, the Mind Stone was something of a different beast. After all, its primary function was to control the minds of living beings, and its consciousness was undoubtedly more powerful than the other Infinity Stones. After Sherlock finished explaining the basics of the Infinity Stones, everyone was stunned, except for Rhodes, who had a strange expression on his face. The strange expression on Rhodes' face reached its peak when Sherlock explained that gathering all 6 Infinity Stones could essentially grant any wish. "So, your so-called Infinity Stones are the Dragon Balls that possess power." As soon as Rhodes' words left his mouth, everyone's expressions suddenly became a little strange. Even Sherlock's mouth twitched slightly, but Sherlock quickly accepted Rhodes' explanation. "In a way, you're right. Of course, if you just want a pair of women's underwear like Oolongit and Dragon Ball, the Reality Stone will satisfy you." Sherlock didn't forget to demonstrate to Rhodes, using the World Scepter in his hand to contort a pair of pink women's underwear onto Rhodes' head. Everyone couldn't help but laugh at Rhodes' bewildered expression, holding the panties in his hand, and the atmosphere began to brighten. A moment later, Thor flew back. Unlike in the movie, this time, Thor didn't angrily grab Tony's neck. Instead, he acted a bit emo and found an empty seat to sit down. "I'm sorry, I lost them. They were too fast and scattered. I couldn't find the guy with the scepter." With Thor's return, the cheerful atmosphere fell silent again. Captain America and Tony soon began arguing over their differing philosophies. Seeing the expressions of the crowd, Sherlock knew it was time to step in. After all, Tony and Captain America had different ideologies, and someone had to step up and unify them. In the movies, Hawkeye had always done that, and now it was Sherlock's turn. Seeing the two men about to argue again, Sherlock stood up and stopped them. "All right, stop it. This is my fault. I underestimated the power of the Mind Stone, not Tony. Captain, calm down. Tony's ideas aren't wrong. There will indeed be more dangerous situations in the future, and we need more help." As Sherlock finished speaking, Captain America's face was filled with anger and confusion, while Tony's was filled with fear. "You saw it. You saw the future. Oh my God. I thought it was just my fear, but it's real." Tony rushed forward, grabbed Sherlock's shoulders, and began to question him about the future. Tony's reaction made everyone realize that there was something going on, something they didn't know about yet. Sherlock finally struggled free from Tony's clutches and cast a petrifying spell on Tony to calm him down before speaking. "Calm down, Tony. I know what you're afraid of. A greater crisis unfolded in the future, and all the Avengers perished before your eyes, leaving you the only one who survived. Isn't that the most terrifying thing you've ever seen? Calm down, Tony. That's just the effect of the Mind Stone. I won't let that happen. While we will face stronger enemies in the future, our team will also continue to grow." As Sherlock finished speaking, everyone present fell silent, looking at Tony with a hint of understanding. Similarly, they understood why Tony wanted to create more Iron Legions and was obsessed with creating Ultron. This situation would be hard for anyone to accept. Death in battle isn't the worst thing. What's terrifying is seeing all your teammates die, leaving you the only one alive. Seeing everyone calm down, Sherlock sighed helplessly. With a flick of his wand, he lifted Tony's petrifying spell and addressed the group. Everyone, I know I'm not always very reliable, but this time, please trust me. I can see the future, and I know you want to know it, but I'm sorry, I can't tell you. The future is like Schrödinger's cat. While you can observe it, once you reveal it, you lose its infinite possibilities. But please trust me, I'm quietly making preparations for a future where everyone can walk happily under the sun. So, this time, please give me a little trust, and let's work together to resolve this crisis. As Sherlock finished his words, he bowed to the group for the first time. It must be said that even the most unreliable person in normal times still has a certain amount of authority when he starts to act reliable. Thor was the first to react. He walked over and helped Sherlock up. He patted Sherlock on the shoulder and said, "What are you talking about? We always believed in you. You are my good brother, Thor Odinson." Chapter 468 Harry arrives. Thor's repeated words seemed to flip a switch. Everyone stood up, walked over to Sherlock, and patted him on the shoulder, expressing their support. Sherlock, of course, wasn't going to let them down and immediately began to plan the details of the operation. "Tony, remember those hard drives you returned to me?" Sherlock's words made Tony feel uneasy. After a long pause, he cautiously asked, "Are you talking about the hard drives filled with the works of various teachers?" "Yes, let's find them. Jarvis has made backups there. While they're certainly not as good as the current Jarvis, we can reconstruct the past Jarvis from the residual data of the present Jarvis. No matter what, we must protect this place. Ultron has no physical form. We can't let him take the things in Stark Tower again." Tony, still grieving the loss of Jarvis, immediately ran to the warehouse upon hearing that Jarvis could be resurrected. Meanwhile, Black Widow and the others began searching the news and Avengers databases to see what Ultron had read. After arranging Tony's mission, Sherlock began seeking outside help. After all, Ultron was a program, and a top-tier hacker. Relying solely on the computer skills of these few people to dig out Ultron's location on the vast internet was a pipe dream. "Hello, honey, you haven't called me in ages. I missed you so much." As the call connected, a sweet female voice rang out from Sherlock's phone. The ambiguous address instantly captured the attention of all the Avengers. Indeed, with the exception of Tony, who was not present, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and stared intently at Sherlock on the phone. Their eyes revealed a sense of relief, as if their own pig had finally gotten something to eat. "Harry, where are you now? I need your help." When Sherlock didn't object to the female voice's call, everyone looked at Sherlock with a look of relief, as if their own pig had finally gotten something to eat. As for why Sherlock didn't object, it was simply because he was used to it. After all, during the days he'd been helping Anna, Sherlock had grown accustomed to Harley constantly calling him honey. Furthermore, Harley's Harley Quinn's appearance perfectly matched Sherlock's taste. Although they hadn't truly developed a romantic relationship, they were still very close friends. Upon hearing Sherlock needed help, Harley naturally agreed without hesitation. After asking for Sherlock's address, she said she'd be there the next morning and would call honey then. Little did she know, Harley's words nearly made the Avengers' eyes pop out. Is this already happening? This kid's actually stealing cabbages behind our backs. Almost everyone familiar with Sherlock had the same expression on their faces. Those who had no idea what kind of personality Harley was on the other end of the line had already confirmed their relationship based on just a few words. After Sherlock finished his call and summoned help, he turned around to see everyone's gossipy faces. The strangest thing was, even within those gossipy expressions was a hint of relief. "What's wrong? Is there a problem? Why are you all looking at me like that?" Sherlock looked at everyone present, somewhat puzzled. Seeing that Sherlock seemed a little confused, no one said anything, but gave him an "I understand" look and continued to work. Sherlock was completely bewildered by the gazes, completely confused. He had no idea why the atmosphere had become so strange after just one phone call. Had he missed something? It was clear that no one had the slightest intention of explaining anything to Sherlock. Sherlock, unfazed, shrugged and went back to making other arrangements. As the saying goes, Everyone has their specialties. They'd been busy all night, tracking down Ultron, searching for information, but apart from barely resurrecting Jarvis, they'd achieved nothing. But the next morning, Harley, sporting blue and pink twin tails, had barely entered Stark Tower before 10 minutes had revealed Ultron's activities within the database. Ultron had completely erased all information about Baron Strucker from the server, completely obliterating it. This was precisely what Ultron had done before stealing Loki's scepter. Of course, this wasn't a problem for Harley, a world-class hacker. Using only the name Baron Strucker, which was similar to his codename, she mapped out Strucker's network in just 5 minutes. Harley's computer prowess was a real lesson for the Avengers, especially Tony, who considered himself the technological master. He was stunned by Harley's miraculous hacking skills and even offered her a job as Stark's chief cyber advisor. Sadly, Harley preferred life at K to being an Avenger or Stark Enterprise's chief cyber advisor. After all, the Avengers mostly faced powerful and dangerous enemies, while the life of a chief tech advisor at Stark Enterprise was far too ordinary. Harley, naturally a bit crazy, preferred K's life, a little bit of humdrum amidst the excitement. At least K's enemies could still be considered human, while for the Avengers, battling aliens was practically a daily occurrence. Tony was deeply disappointed by Harley's refusal, but after Harley single-handedly pierced through Jarvis's defenses around Stark Tower, Tony gave her his business card and promised to keep her chief tech advisor position. Of course, compared to Harley's skills, everyone was more curious about Harley and Sherlock's relationship. After all, their address to each other was a bit strange. Sherlock kept calling Harley by her first name, while Harley kept calling Sherlock honey. Seeing everyone's expressions of "I want to eat some melon" expression, Sherlock was helpless and took out the pensieve and placed it in front of the group of people, then pulled out the memory of himself supporting Anna and placed it in it. I don't know why, after seeing Sherlock's experience in Las Vegas, the way everyone looked at Sherlock changed from the pride of "our own pigs can finally dig up cabbages" to the helplessness of "I'm so disappointed in you." This made Sherlock confused. Chapter 469, Ultron's Fear. While Sherlock was still trying to understand why everyone was looking at him with such resentful eyes, Harley continued to type away at her keyboard. Just as Sherlock was about to ask, a shrill alarm went off from Harley's computer. At the same moment, her typing speed suddenly increased. The piercing alarm attracted the attention of nearly every Avenger present, and almost everyone gathered around Harley, eager to see what was going on. After a moment, Harley stopped typing, tilting her head in confusion as she stared at the strings of code on her screen, letting out a cute, puzzled sound. Seeing Harley stop, Sherlock could no longer suppress his curiosity. After all, from their trip to Las Vegas, Sherlock knew one thing: whenever Harley's computer started to sound the alarm, it was a sure sign that something was wrong. What's wrong? What happened? Sherlock asked impatiently. As it turned out, Sherlock's predictions were spot on. After hearing Sherlock's question, Harley wasted no time and directly explained the situation to everyone. Just now, the databases of all major forces worldwide were simultaneously attacked by an unknown data stream. The firewalls were overwhelmed at an extremely fast speed, with the difference between the two being measurable in milliseconds. It's almost certainly Ultron's attack. But what's puzzling is Ultron's behavior. Harley paused at this point, her expression of confusion growing even more intense. After a quizzical glance at Sherlock standing beside her, she continued. What's puzzling is Ultron's behavior. After hacking into these databases, he did only one thing: search for data. Sherlock's name was searched over 1 million times, and the wizard's name was searched over 3.2 million times. Unfortunately, Ultron's speed is so great that I can't trace his exact location. The only thing I know for sure is that this unusual data stream ultimately disappeared in Europe. Sherlock, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Captain. As Harley finished speaking, a look of surprise crossed everyone's face, staring at Sherlock standing nearby. Goodness me, what the hell did you do behind their backs to let Ultron search you and your alias nearly 5 million times, was the unanimous thought of almost every Avenger present. Sherlock's expression was even stranger, so strange that it made him sit up in bed and curse. No, is he sick? Searching me like this? I didn't do anything unspeakable to Ultron, and I didn't dig up any of his ancestors' graves. Why are you all looking at me like that? Sherlock explained to the crowd with a vexed expression. He truly couldn't understand why Ultron was so fixated on him. The previously puzzled faces of the crowd, upon hearing Sherlock's mention of digging up ancestral graves, shifted their gazes to Tony, who stood aside, his head in his hands, thinking. After all, ethically speaking, Ultron was Tony's creation, a rebellious son. Technically, Tony was Ultron's father, and the Mind Stone was his mother. Putting aside the captivating ethical drama of how Tony had fathered a child with a coin-sized stone, Ultron's behavior alone made everyone want to ask Tony a question. Tony, are you sure your parents' graves are still in good condition? Meanwhile, scientists Dr. Banner and Tony's brains were clearly working differently. Accustomed to conducting experiments, they almost immediately began analyzing Ultron's behavior, trying to glean a clue. They quickly grasped a flash of insight. Ultron fears Sherlock, too. They both uttered their conclusions almost in unison, and surprisingly, their analysis was identical. As they uttered these words, their eyes brimmed with excitement, as if they had met a soulmate. However, this scene looked different to others. It was a bit disgusting, given the way their eyes looked, almost thread-like, no discrimination intended, simply plot necessity. Widow Black, Dr. Banner's lover, at least for now, couldn't bear to watch these two seemingly find a soulmate, and interrupted their adorable gaze. After all, if she didn't speak up, Black Widow was really afraid that the next second the two would hug and start biting each other. By then, Thor wouldn't be the only one with a green head. He might even have to go to the barber shop to get the thing on his head green. Two great scientists, stop playing dumb and tell us your conclusions. After hearing Black Widow's voice, the two looked at each other. Banner, despite Black Widow's rolling eyes, politely extended his hand to Tony. Tony, who was used to being in the spotlight, naturally stood up and began to explain to everyone. We all overestimate Ultron. After all, Ultron is just a strong artificial intelligence created based on current science. The reason why Ultron is afraid of Sherlock is actually very simple, because Sherlock's ability is beyond his cognition. That's right. I've seen the analysis of Sherlock's magic in Tony's experimental records. Simple science cannot explain Sherlock's unreasonable magic. Sherlock's magic is even higher than the existence of the Infinity Stones on some levels. This is the source of Ultron's fear. Seeing Tony paused, Dr. Banner took up Tony's words very tacitly and continued to explain to everyone. Banner is right. On the other hand, Sherlock has an Infinity Stone in his hand, a reality stone that can distort reality. Coupled with Sherlock's understanding of the Infinity Stones, with the unknown of the enemy and the enemy's understanding of him, it would be difficult for Ultron to not be afraid. In other words, Sherlock is actually our exclusive and targeted noble phantasm against Ultron. The two of them had a tacit understanding and explained everything clearly to everyone. Only Black Widow was not so happy. For some reason, Black Widow always felt that a faint green light began to emanate from her head. And it flickered, making people feel a little uneasy. Chapter 470, Intelligence brought by Harry. While Banner and Tony were passionately analyzing the situation, Ultron, on the other hand, felt a fear of Sherlock, just as they had predicted. As they had predicted, Ultron was terrified by Sherlock's magic. During that brief moment in Stark Tower, Sherlock had psychologically scarred the newly born Ultron. As a child born from the Mind Stone, Ultron was well versed in the Reality Stones, also known as Infinity Stones, and believed himself to be no match for them. After all, even the Reality Stones, for all their power, couldn't control anything within the virtual network. However, Sherlock's transfiguration and shattering curse completely shattered Ultron's illusions. Even that shattered body was equipped with state-of-the-art sensors and scanners, yet they couldn't even understand Sherlock's magic. Unable to detect any energy, unable to sense anything amiss, the intact robots charging towards Sherlock's Iron Legion scattered to the ground, seemingly unsustainable. Even more terrifying was Sherlock's use of transfiguration to churn the ground. Beyond his visual senses, Ultron, in his robotic form, couldn't even sense anything amiss. His other scanners showed the ground as it was, and the spikes seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. Add to that Sherlock's mention of the Infinity Stones, and the newly born Ultron was instantly overwhelmed. He didn't even have time to utter a single word before charging forward with Loki's scepter. Sherlock's ability to instill such unparalleled fear in Ultron was largely thanks to Tony. To protect Sherlock, Tony kept a limited amount of Sherlock's information in the Avengers database. Much of the information on Sherlock was handwritten and never uploaded. After all, as a tech tycoon, Tony knew that electronic devices were not always reliable. The most reliable were always the most authentic. Fearing Sherlock's unknown, Ultron immediately sought out two allies upon receiving Loki's scepter. That was Wanda and Quicksilver. Unlike the movies, however, this time, the relationship between the three isn't the Ultron-led leadership relationship of the films, but rather a partnership. Despite Ultron's reluctance, Wanda is the only ally he can find whose abilities are comparable to Sherlock's. Unfortunately, the two remain unaware of Ultron's subtle intentions, and after Ultron's deception, they're ready to form a partnership, just as in the movies. Upon finding his ally, Ultron immediately sets out to build a powerful body, just as in the movies. But this time, his goal isn't to defeat the Avengers and destroy humanity, ultimately achieving true freedom. Ultron simply fears being torn apart by Sherlock, like the other robots. After all, only a few places have the technology to build a robotic body. If Sherlock truly goes mad and destroys those places, he'll likely be reduced to a ghost wandering the cyber world for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, Ultron doesn't know that if he truly acquires a body, Sherlock might have even more ways to deal with him. On both sides of the conversation, Ultron was still rejoicing over having a backup plan against Sherlock, while the Avengers were also delighted by Sherlock's acquisition of a humanoid noble phantasm against Ultron. Sherlock himself was still a little confused. But to everyone's delight, Harley truly lived up to her reputation as a network expert. After watching the crowd clamor for a while, she continued to talk about another discovery she had made. One more thing, I've discovered a hidden and untraceable data stream that's been attacking the network nuclear missile, seemingly trying to obtain the launch codes. I've analyzed this data stream and it's Ultron. But don't worry, there's a hidden mastermind within the root level servers that's been modifying the nuclear missile codes at an incredibly fast speed. Almost in microseconds, the person who reacted most strongly to Harley's words was none other than Tony. After all, besides Ultron, there was only one other person in the world who could do this, or perhaps it was someone who wasn't even human. Jarvis. Jarvis is still alive. Ultron didn't destroy Jarvis at all. Tony was overjoyed like a child, tears welling up in his eyes. Tony's feelings for Jarvis were profound, even deeper than anyone else present. Jarvis was also the person who had been with him the longest. Harley, help Jarvis. You must help Jarvis. I'll do anything you ask. Please help Jarvis. Tony, feeling a moment of joy, immediately reacted and pleaded with Harley. Harley didn't even turn her head, her hands still tapping away on the keyboard as she replied in a muffled voice. Of course, I'm trying. After all, I don't want to be threatened by a nuclear bomb again. God, I just went through a nuclear crisis not long ago. Why am I constantly thinking about nuclear bombs lately? Okay, please leave me alone. I've done everything I can. The rest is up to you Avengers. Harley waved her hand behind her, signaling Tony to leave her alone. Everyone tactfully began to leave the lab occupied by Harry. When it was Sherlock's turn, Harry paused from her keyboard work and raised her adorable fist. Go ahead, little pudding. The world depends on you. Knowing Harry's temper, Sherlock, despite the flirtatious glances, waved at Harry with a relaxed expression, signaling his understanding. Then, he earned a few more scornful looks. Tony, in particular, looked at Sherlock with a strange look. Should he take Sherlock out for some sex? Why did he feel a little strange about this guy? Could it be a difference in sexual orientation? No, I think he's attracted to women, too. Fortunately, Sherlock didn't know what Tony was thinking, or else he swore he would have let Tony experience what it was like to be a teddy bear, and a female one at that. After the transformation, throw this guy into a group of male teddy bears to give Tony a good brainwash. Chapter 471 Intelligence Analysis. After leaving Harley's room, everyone began analyzing Ultron's plans. After all, those present were either World War II veterans, tech giants, or even seasoned spies. It would be unbelievable if all the intelligence depended on Harley alone, especially since they had Black Egg's private intelligence agency as their backup. Hill quickly provided a detailed account of Ultron's movements that night, showing that jet propulsion laboratories, robotics labs, and high-end manufacturing facilities around the world had all been targeted by Ultron. The good news was that Ultron's actions that night resulted in only casualties, but no fatalities. Most of the people attacked exhibited a peculiar reaction. Some became dazed, as if they had witnessed something terrifying. A group even went so far as to shout nonsense like physics doesn't exist and this world isn't real. This was understandable, considering that everyone had been assaulted by an invisible ghost. It wasn't unforgivable. Watching Ultron, Wanda, and Quicksilver traversing the world to gather resources, the Avengers grew increasingly anxious. Finally, Black Widow, using her veteran spy intuition, spotted a clue. Why did Ultron, after scanning the entire Avengers database, delete all information about Baron Strucker? Black Widow's words seemed to flip a switch on everyone's minds. Fortunately, Tony, in charge of logistics, always had backups of nearly all internal data in paper form. He immediately ordered everyone to unload several large boxes of paper files. Looking at those familiar boxes, Sherlock's PTSD suddenly kicked in, and his mind began to unconsciously recall the chaotic scene at his training base. Determined to avoid becoming that unsightly demon of the abyss, Sherlock decisively selected a box and began to slack off. As luck would have it, Sherlock chose Baron Strucker's social connections. As Hydra's chief scientist and the creator of Wanda and Quicksilver, Baron Strucker's social connections are quite complex. They include politicians and businessmen with ties to Hydra, as well as some of the world's leading scientists. From the elite to the scoundrels, from the charitable saints to the vicious arms dealers. Sherlock was amazed by the sight. Reality isn't a movie, no one is truly black and white. Just like Baron Strucker, he's a delicate shade of gray. It's hard to find a single adjective to describe this complex man. If you call him evil, he's certainly funded countless impoverished students and helped the underprivileged. But if you call him good, he conducted brutal human experiments on children, manufactured weapons, and sold them to black market arms dealers, sparking a regional war. Sherlock saw this guy as a complex individual. He even thought he'd joined Hydra solely to research unethical science and technology. But Sherlock hadn't anticipated this. Astonishingly, that Tony's actions had caught his attention. After snatching the information Sherlock was engrossed in, Tony let out a curious exclamation. Huh? Our Baron Strucker actually knows this guy. Upon hearing Tony's exclamation, everyone gathered in his direction, eager to see what he had discovered. Tony, undeterred, displayed the information and began to explain it. I know this guy. He's an underground arms dealer active along the African coast. Hey, Captain, don't look at me like that, you old idiot. You know, in my past business, I inevitably had dealings with this guy. Language. The captain said to Tony with some dissatisfaction after Tony choked him. It was clear Tony didn't care. After all, they had all seen Captain Linguistics. If the captain were to lecture them about language, most people would roll their eyes in displeasure. After all, Captain Linguistics' language was far more vulgar than their own. The captain was also helpless. His faith had been shattered by that jerk Sherlock. Sooner or later, he was going to give that jerk a beating. Tony rolled his eyes at the captain before continuing. I heard a while ago that this guy had gotten a shipment of world-changing goods, but I don't know what it was. Meanwhile, the information was passed to Black Widow. She looked at the weathered, middle-aged man listed in the information, raised an eyebrow, and exclaimed in admiration. This guy's got a really tasteful new tattoo. Huh? A new tattoo? Let me see. After hearing Black Widow's praise, Tony couldn't contain his curiosity. He took the photo from Black Widow's hand, looked at it, and offered his opinion. Hey. When I knew him, he didn't have this tattoo on his neck. Captain America leaned over, saw the photo in Tony's hand, rolled his eyes, and said to him, that's obviously not a tattoo, it's a brand. And it looks like a symbol. Banner, look up what this symbol means. Banner was quick, immediately reporting the symbol's origin. Let me see. It's a symbol from an African tribe called Wakanda. It doesn't mean anything good. It represents a thief. It looks like this guy stole something in Wakanda, got caught, and got this branded. Hawkeye, after listening to Banner's words, spread his hands and summarized everyone's analysis. However, after Hawkeye finished his summary, both Captain America and Tony looked unhappy. Because both knew what this so-called Wakanda held that was worthy of this profit-conscious arms dealer, willing to steal it at any cost. Vibranium, too. Cap and Tony's lover exclaimed almost in unison, their gazes fixed on Cap's shield, which lay nearby. Meanwhile, in a corner, unnoticed, Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief. After all, Ultron had been terrified by him, and the fact that he was still targeting vibranium, as in the original novel, was beyond Sherlock's expectations. The Infinity Stones were truly powerful, and Ultron, created from the Mind Stone, truly spared no effort in carrying out its commands. Chapter 472, Brother-in-Law and Brother-in-Law Alone. Despite knowing Ultron's next move, Everyone was once again stymied by the operational arrangements. According to the original plan, with the exception of Dr. Banner, who remained on the plane, the rest of the group was to prevent Ultron from obtaining the vibranium. However, this presented a challenge. First, there was Sherlock. Given Ultron's current fear of Sherlock, there was a high probability that the moment Sherlock appeared, Ultron would flee. Ultron was a program. Having lost his current target, if Ultron truly desired to remain hidden, finding him would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Therefore, Sherlock couldn't immediately appear before Ultron, at least not until there was a clear opportunity to siege him. However, if Sherlock didn't appear, the task of dealing with a highly mobile foe like Ultron would fall to Tony, who had originally planned to visit Jarvis at the Origin Server Center. After all, the backup Jarvis Sherlock had provided was still Jarvis, but due to time constraints, many of the upgrades Tony had made to the current Jarvis were missing from the old one. Therefore, the Jarvis of the past could only provide a supporting role. To Tony, only the Jarvis currently hidden within the Origin server was the real Jarvis. Unsurprisingly, there were disagreements regarding personnel arrangements, but it was only after a friendly negotiation between Captain and Tony that an agreement was reached. Tony initially followed his own group. After all, Jarvis still had Harley's assistance, and Ultron wouldn't have a chance to completely strangle Jarvis anytime soon. Furthermore, as long as he could hold off most of Ultron's energy, Jarvis would be safe. And, to be honest, Jarvis was indeed needed on the server to constantly modify the nuclear bomb codes. Even if Tony went there, it would only make Jarvis's identity more visible, which would actually hinder Jarvis's actions. Convinced by this reasoning, Tony dutifully donned his armor and followed the others onto the plane, heading for an abandoned ship graveyard off the African coast. The so-called ship graveyard is essentially a shallow shell where derelict ships run aground, awaiting scrapping or dismantling. Apparently, dismantling facilities are unavailable in Africa, so the ship graveyard has become a well-known black market. Each derelict vessel harbors a shady business, which has in turn boosted the local economy. As a dark underworld arms magnate, the man Tony knew unsurprisingly occupied the largest and best derelict vessel within the graveyard. As planned, Cap and Tony, along with Black Widow, Hawkeye, and Thor, entered the ship's cabin to engage Ultron, while Falcon remained aloft, keeping watch. After all, Falcon is only suited for aerial combat, his equipment would be too limited for land combat, especially in the confined space of a ship's cabin. As for Sherlock and Banner, well, they were left on the plane, presumably to look after the aircraft, but in reality, neither Sherlock nor Hulk were needed. Everything went smoothly. They indeed found Ultron transporting vibranium in the cabin, and Tony even teased his rebellious son. Compared to Tony, Sherlock was feeling much more uncomfortable. After all, Sherlock and Hulk had only met a few times, including the mission to seize Loki's scepter. Not to mention Hulk, even Dr. Banner had only just met during this mission. Sherlock and Banner didn't know each other very well. The most Sherlock knew of Dr. Banner was a portrait hanging on the wall alongside Einstein and Tesla. It was safe to say they were truly unfamiliar. And most importantly, it was unclear when Banner had gotten involved with Black Widow, who had previously lived in his house. For some reason, Sherlock felt like he was looking at a pig who had taken advantage of his sister. This feeling fueled Sherlock's feelings, and the atmosphere inside the plane, now only the two of them, grew increasingly awkward. Sherlock, long time no see, Banner spoke first, trying to ease the awkward atmosphere. Haha, yeah, the last time we met was during the Battle of New York, Sherlock replied, slightly embarrassed. Yeah. I heard later that you were frightened by the Hulk back then. I apologize on his behalf. Yeah, it's okay. It's all in the past. Sherlock's face darkened slightly as he replied, then fell silent. After all, Sherlock really didn't want to recall that time on the helicarrier, when the Hulk's wicked smile had frightened him so much that he almost thought his ass was in danger and he ran for his life. After this awkward exchange, the two of them fell into an eerie silence, the atmosphere even more awkward than before. Banner, in particular, felt like he might as well have called out the Hulk. It was too damn embarrassing, and it seemed like he had hid a sore spot for Sherlock. But Banner was still an adult, and the heart rate control he'd cultivated over years of hiding was no joke. After a moment's thought, Banner forced a seemingly affable smile and tried to open the conversation again. Well, I heard Natasha tell you something about you. It seems you had a wonderful experience after the Battle of New York. After saying this, Banner almost wanted to slap himself in the face. What the hell was he saying? It wasn't Banner's fault, though. Sherlock looked at Banner like a pig stealing his sister's cabbage, and Banner, for some reason, looked at Sherlock like he was seeing his girlfriend's younger brother. They hadn't felt anything before when there were more people around, but now that they were alone, the awkwardness of their first meeting intensified. Sherlock, in particular, had already created a Hogwarts in his shoe, his mind frantically analyzing what Banner had just said. What had Black Widow told him? Did Banner find out about me asking Anna to cosplay as Hulk, or are you complaining that your actions didn't involve him? Sherlock had never felt time pass so slowly, and for a moment he didn't even know how to respond to Banner's words. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 473 The Battle in the Cabin. Unlike Sherlock's awkward situation, Tony's was truly spectacular. After confirming Sherlock's absence, Ultron, the rebellious son, unhesitatingly attempted to murder his father. With 2 groups of men, plus the armed forces of the underground black market arms dealer, the 3 groups were practically exhausted. Ultron, aided by the Iron Legion, Quicksilver, and Wanda, stood no chance against the Avengers, even managing to dispatch the gun-toting hordes. Compared to these men, the Avengers were undoubtedly much more limited, especially Black Widow and Cap. Even though they were physically formidable enough to hold their own against 5, they were still bound to take damage from the bullets. Hawkeye was the only one in the entire cabin who was relatively well prepared. Compared to the others, he was undoubtedly alert. As a ranged damage dealer, he embodied the 6th Master Spirit to its fullest. Combined with the bow's inherent quietness and Hawkeye's versatile arrows, Hawkeye instantly became the most deadly of the group present. Of course, this was only temporary. As Tony, carrying Ultron, flew out of the cabin and engaged in a righteous fight with a soaring falcon against the rebellious son, the situation inside the cabin began to change dramatically. The brunt of the attack was borne by the underlings of the ruthless arms dealers. Faced with these war for profits, neither the Avengers, Ultron's Iron Legion robots, nor Wanda and Quicksilver showed any mercy. Wanda and Quicksilver, who had lost loved ones in the war, held a deep hatred for the arms dealers, especially Quicksilver, his brother, who struck with unparalleled ferocity. Over half of these unfortunate figures serving as background figures fell at the hands of Quicksilver. After dealing with the background figures, Quicksilver began to cooperate with his sister Wanda. Quicksilver used his speed advantage to knock down the Avengers, and Wanda followed up with magic to disrupt their brains. The first to suffer was Black Widow. Despite being a veteran spy, she was mercilessly treated the same way Hawkeye had been treated when he encountered Quicksilver in Sokovia, a man with extraordinary skills and speed that was too fast for the naked eye to detect. She was flipped over by Quicksilver. He spun 3 or 4 times in mid-air before landing. This was likely due to Tony modifying Black Widow's suit to include some protective features. Otherwise, with Black Widow's normal body, this blow would have been enough to sustain her. However, before Black Widow could even get up, Wanda caught up, and the next second, Black Widow was instantly transported back to the place where her nightmare began, the Red Room. Although Black Widow knew that the Red Room had been destroyed by her and the Avengers with Sherlock's help, and that even her uterus, which had been removed during surgery, had been healed by Sherlock, she was still drawn in by the past when it resurfaced before her. It wasn't the nightmare of the Red Room that brought Black Widow down, but rather human instinct. It's like being reborn into a younger age, always wanting to change something, whether it's a past decision or striving to improve oneself and study. As long as there are regrets, then the decline is inevitable. Cap, like Black Widow, was trapped in the same situation. However, unlike Black Widow's painful past, Cap's dream was simple, the victory dance he owed Carter. Their plan was undoubtedly successful. Until Quicksilver saw Thor throw his hammer at him. As they say, men remain young until death. No man can resist words like artifact and epic, and the Meowth hammer certainly fits the bill. Quicksilver thought that after obtaining Meowth hammer, he could play a trick on the Golden Giant, teaching the so-called god a lesson in not throwing hammers around, as it would be disastrous if it hit anything. However, Quicksilver didn't expect Meowth hammer to actually carry him flying. Seeing his brother being carried into a pile of boxes by Meowth Hammer, Wanda, without a care in the world, appeared from behind Thor and attempted to use magic to confuse him, just as she had done with Captain America and Black Widow. To Wanda's surprise, Thor, despite his Asgardian strength, didn't immediately fall prey to the illusion, though he didn't attack her either. Finally, Wanda fled, frustrated. Of course, Thor didn't forget to report Wanda's actions over the comms, but he didn't realize that Hawkeye was the only person who might have heard his warning. And right after he finished his message, Thor himself fell into the illusion. Unlike Earthlings, Thor, a descendant of Odin, generally doesn't dream. When he does, his dreams are always about the future, a gift common to the audience and family. Seeing Quicksilver still unaware, Wanda finally gritted her teeth and decided to deal with Hawkeye first, waiting until the area was clear before checking on her brother. However, Wanda wasn't prepared for this situation, as Hawkeye had been controlled once before during the Battle of New York. Especially after Thor's warning, Hawkeye's vigilance was heightened. The moment Wanda appeared, Hawkeye imprinted an electrode arrow on Wanda's forehead, subduing her. Fortunately, Quicksilver had already awakened and rushed over, giving Hawkeye another taste of the same 1.5 spin he'd experienced in Sokovia, before escaping with Wanda in his arms. Hawkeye was so angry that he vowed to find Sherlock as soon as this battle was over to ask if there was anything he could do to stop this jerk. He was going to throw him down 800 times, so that Quicksilver could experience what it felt like to do a 1.5 twist in the air. Meanwhile, inside the plane, Sherlock and Dr. Banner were awkwardly at a loss for words when they heard Hawkeye's outburst. Banner immediately stood up and asked you if Hulk could join the fight. Hawkeye, after observing the situation around him, decisively rejected Banner's offer. No, we don't need Hulk yet, but we need Sherlock's help. Damn it. Captain, Thor, and Natasha were all tricked by that little girl and are now all hallucinating. Sherlock had no idea what Banner was thinking, but to Sherlock, Hawkeye's words were like heavenly music. If they stayed in this small plane cabin with Banner any longer, Sherlock felt like he was going to have a breakdown due to embarrassment. Without hesitation, he answered Hawkeye's request for support. Okay, I'll be there. Sherlock didn't even finish his words before he took out his wand, activated a sap parrot, and disappeared into the cabin. Looking at the now empty cabin, Banner could only sigh helplessly. After all, the road to dealing with his girlfriend's brother was difficult and long. Chapter 474, Sherlock, the Master of Wiping. When Sherlock arrived inside the cabin, he discovered it had been utterly destroyed, scattered weapons and ammunition, and the bodies of unscrupulous merchants scattered everywhere. Hawkeye was also frantically busy, and upon seeing this, Charlotte rushed over to help, beginning to assist Hawkeye. Dealing with Wanda's unmistakable magic was actually quite simple. Sherlock only needed to cast a single spell to instantly sober her up. It's no exaggeration to say that if Sherlock wanted to, with his current understanding of magic, he could use his own magic to directly dispel Wanda's magic. It wouldn't be a difficult task. The real difficulty lay in controlling these people controlled by the illusion. Black Widow was relatively easy. Hawkeye had already restrained her before Sherlock arrived, and once Sherlock arrived, a single spell brought her back to consciousness. The challenge lay with Captain America and Thor. One was an Asgardian with a brain full of muscle, and the other was at the pinnacle of human nature. Sherlock and Hawkeye had to work hard to help them regain consciousness. After all, Sherlock needed to use magic to sort through the memories of those possessed while helping them regain consciousness. Otherwise, who would truly believe that chaos magic was easy to defeat? Just watch the movie and you'll know how damaging chaos magic is to memory and the mind, especially to the mind. Even Wanda herself, influenced by chaos magic, later on, became a villain. Just as Sherlock and Hawkeye, busy dealing with the three men, finally took care of them, Tony, who had just rushed out with his rebellious son, received more bad news. Wanda had used magic to influence Dr. Banner, and now the Hulk was out of control and charging towards the city. Upon hearing this, Sherlock almost rolled his eyes and rushed over. Oh my goodness, I'm not here to fight monsters, so I'm here just to clean up your mess, right? Without giving any more thought, Sherlock and Hawkeye told them to follow, then pulled out a broom from their divine realm and mounted it, dashing towards the city. If possible, Sherlock really didn't want to ride a broomstick. After all, it was a bit, well, embarrassing. But the situation was urgent, and Sherlock couldn't care less. Most importantly, Of all the flying objects in Sherlock's current magical system, a broomstick was the most agile. God knows how Tony on the other side managed to stop the Mad Hulk. As for why he didn't use a portal, that was a joke. Sherlock didn't want to die young. This was Africa. This was the first time Sherlock had set foot on this ancient continent in his 2 lifetimes. It was as unfamiliar as it could be. Opening a portal casually was like thinking he'd lived too long. The dangers of space magic were repeatedly mentioned in both Camartage and Hogwarts in HP. It wasn't something you could just use whenever you wanted. By the time Sherlock arrived in the city, he was completely paralyzed. All he saw was the mess. Not far away, Tony, in his Hulkbuster armor, was fighting the green fat girl. The 2 massive figures, one red and one green, did seem to complement each other, but Sherlock clearly had no interest in their current battle. Upon arriving, Sherlock immediately began to cast his restoration spell. It must be said that within the Avengers, Sherlock was truly the most popular figure. Especially when Sherlock appeared at the side of the 2 men's battle and began restoring the damaged items, the locals practically regarded Sherlock as a deity. Shattered houses, as if time had flown backwards, were restored to their original state under Sherlock's magic. Smashed cars gradually returned to their original state, even cars that had been damaged countless times were transformed into pristine new versions under Sherlock's spell. The most dramatic sight was the overturned stalls, crushed oranges, and some food and drinks, all restored to their original state under Sherlock's magic. Fortunately, even in his frenzy, the Hulk hadn't harmed anyone. The only casualties on the scene were those affected by the aftermath of the fight, and Sherlock provided them with basic medical care. Some of the less serious injuries healed instantly. As for the more serious injuries, Sherlock could only provide basic treatment and let them wait for medical personnel to arrive. Stark Enterprise would cover all expenses. With Sherlock's promise, those caught in the aftermath of the fight gradually let go of their reservations and spontaneously applauded Sherlock. Sherlock was enjoying himself, but Tony and Hulk, on the other hand, were having a much harder time. The 2 fought from the main road to university, and from there into the air. Fortunately, Sherlock was quick to clean up the mess, appearing in front of them just as they were about to turn toward a building. A massive portal appeared, and Sherlock flung the 2 back into the ship graveyard. Sherlock bowed slightly to the terrified cattle and horses behind the glass curtain wall, then stepped into the massive portal and disappeared. With Sherlock's help, the economic losses from the Hulk's rampage were incredibly close to 0. If you count the cars Sherlock restored to pristine condition, the figures might even be negative. However, the subsequent casualties and mental damage would be enough for Tony to handle for a while. But Sherlock clearly had no interest in discussing this with the 2 men. Having wiped out the mess so many times, Sherlock was now seething with rage. He'd apologized more times in his entire 2 lifetimes combined than today, and he clearly needed to vent. Just below Sherlock, 2 massive figures were engaged in a tussle, providing a perfect outlet for his anger. Sherlock didn't even need to invoke the power of the World Scepter. A simple wave of his wand unleashed countless golems, who began to assault the 2 men. Given the sheer numbers, even the Hulk was ultimately pinned to the ground by Sherlock's transfiguration-powered golems, leaving him helpless and furious. As for Tony, well, compared to Hulk, he is much more miserable. Sherlock controlled the Stone Man to forcibly dismantle Tony's anti-Hulk armor. Now the Stone Man is holding Tony in the armor and spanking him madly. Chapter 475 Thor's World Collapse. Half an hour later, on the return flight, everyone's spirits were subdued. After all, they had lost the battle. While they had intercepted some vibranium, Ultron had also taken a significant amount. However, compared to the wanted situation in the movies, the Avengers' current situation was undoubtedly much better. Thanks to Sherlock, the master of cleaning up, the small coastal African nation suffered no economic losses and even made a small profit. Aside from a large number of frightened people and a few unfortunate individuals whose injuries were reduced to minor ones by Sherlock, there was virtually no loss at all. As for the injured and frightened, they, after receiving compensation from Tony's insurance company, smiled and expressed no objection to the incident. Most importantly, Sherlock's attitude was excellent. No losses, adequate compensation, and a positive attitude all combined to earn the small nation international praise for the Avengers' handling of affairs. This infuriated the politicians who had been looking to cause trouble for the Avengers. Of course, the impact of this incident goes far beyond that. One can only say that behind this group of black uncles there must be an ancient mythical beast that likes to eat American Eagle sauce, and relying on this wave of international popularity. This small African country was very cunning and destroyed the scene where Sherlock used magic to restore it to its original state. Then, they erected a one-to-one statue of Tony's anti-Hulk armor and Hulk at the place where Tony's anti-Hulk armor and Hulk were fighting, which became a new tourist check-in spot. You should know that there are many fans of the Avengers around the world. Many people have made a fortune by buying Avengers peripherals. This small attraction has also successfully raised the GDP of this small country. Many neighboring countries are envious to death, and they even began to look forward to the Avengers coming to their downtown area to fight. After all, such a business with no loss and pure profit is really rare. Of course, the only person hurt by this incident was probably Tony, who had been spanked by Sherlock. Upon learning that a statue had been erected of him, a statue depicting the fight he'd caused with the Hulk, Tony's shame nearly exploded. He even listed this incident and this iconic moment as one of the things he least wanted to recall. Of course, these events are a story for the future, but the impact they had was not. After the Avengers returned to the top floor of Stark Tower in New York, they held an emergency all-hands meeting. By that afternoon, news that shocked those greedy and foolish politicians spread around the world at breakneck speed. The Avengers were now completely disbanded, and the Avengers base atop Stark Tower was completely scrapped and returned to Stark Enterprises. The meeting took place in the morning, the news broke in the afternoon, and by evening, the entire top floor of Stark Tower was completely deserted, with not even a trace of the Avengers' presence left. This was the outcome of Sherlock's discussion with Captain America and Tony. Black Egg's intelligence army returned him after the meeting, and the Avengers began packing up. Of course, with the Ultron issue still unresolved, disbanding was out of the question. At most, they'd simply announce their disbandment, effectively going from a public presence to a covert one. As for the Avengers' future, that was easy. Sherlock's training grounds, everything was already there, no modifications needed. All they had to do was bring their equipment and data. While the big picture wasn't a problem, the little details were still a source of fun. Captain America, in particular, was visibly upset when he saw the room on Sherlock's training grounds reserved for him and Falcon. Why didn't anyone tell me about something this big? Do you know how expensive rent is in New York? That was likely Captain America's first thought upon seeing the room with his name on it. Yes, you read that correctly. A World War II veteran, a member of the Avengers, and one of their leaders, Captain Extreme, a man with a human body, still rents. It's hilarious, and I wonder what those higher-ups were thinking. Captain was a spirited young man renting during World War II, and even after joining the army, becoming captain, and being thought out, he's still renting. What kind of a person is this? A representative example of someone who's been away for half his life and still hasn't found no home? Others don't know, but Sherlock truly feels bad for Captain. As for Captain, well, he's in no mood to care about anyone else. He's silently grieving over the fact that he's already paid a year's rent. Of course, the one who's even more devastated than Captain is probably Thor. God knows how devastated Thor must have been when he emerged from Sherlock's portal, looking all cocky and impressive, and arrived at Sherlock's family training ground. He turned around and saw Odin, a look of satisfaction wielding a hoe in a vegetable patch. Especially when he saw the students passing through Odin's vegetable garden cheerfully greeting him, and Odin smiling back, even picking fresh vegetables for those he liked as snacks. Thor felt as if the sky had fallen. He truly wanted to rush over, hug Odin's thighs, and cry out, "Father, am I no longer your beloved child?" Of course, just when Thor thought the sky had fallen, he turned around and felt the ground collapse too. He saw his mother, being led by several beautiful young women, as if she were about to go out. What made Thor's world collapse was that Frigga, usually dignified and gentle, her words, actions, and even her creations befitting a queen of the gods, was now dressed in a youthful style. Standing next to the girls, she looked like their elder sister. She looked nothing like a mother, she looked like a hot mom out with her daughters. What Thor couldn't accept the most was that his mother, who usually cared about him so much, didn't even have the slightest intention of talking to him after seeing him this time. She just waved her hands at him, and even the sunglasses on her face couldn't hide Frigga's disgusted look towards her son. This time Thor was really sure, and now Thor really wanted to kneel down and shout, "Mom and Dad, love me again." In fact, Thor really did that, but what was the reward? Well, Frigga rolled her eyes and walked away without any mercy, and a dung spoon flew out of the vegetable garden and hit Thor on the head, and Odin cursed angrily. What the hell are you yelling about in broad daylight? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.